I can do it another way. If somebody requests to speak, I'll just add them instantly and I won't remove them. That's easier, I think. There should be a button, request to speak, but I'll add you right away. There you go.
Hello.
Raise hands
Yeah,
is
raise
disabled.
hand is disabled.
Yeah, I didn't
Uh-oh.
see a button to request. I don't know where that is.
Uh-oh. Let's see. Request to speak. Oh, Leggy has to enable that. I can't even do that.
Oh, crap.
Just a short question. I have created a meeting log. So with all the talking points that have been put into the GitHub and the Discord chats, we can work with that if you want, instead of creating a blank page.
That works for me. If you can send it to me, I can also reference it and announce talking points if necessary.
Right now, I have only created it in Notion though, so it's only local on my PC right now, because I didn't know where to put it. Yeah.
Yeah, Legionnaire needs to enable raise hand.
So what I could do, it's just an offer, is just stream my Notion for this meeting and then share the Markdown file later on, and then it can be put somewhere.
So Arctic, do I understand correctly? You have the power to move people into stage, yes?
Yes, so do you. If you right-click them and you click invite to speak, they can join instantly.
Yeah, then I will do this right now on OmniBlade, on, I think, Amazing Set, invite to speak. I assume that everyone will act responsibly, so let me just invite all the programmers into the stage. I think that makes sense.
Lewis, Tarnished Knight.
Tarnished Knight has said that he's programmer.
General BT?
Okay, is there anyone else? USB
if anybody else wants.
USB is programmer, I think. Let me also invite them here. Yeah. Arctic, you can take care of the invites, I think. Just if there's programmer. I don't know who else is programmer here. Okay. I can...
Yes, agent as well. I forgot about agent.
I can offer to moderate the meeting just by reading things and just handing over discussions, if you like. Or does someone else want to do it?
Yeah, sure. I don't mind if you do it, but like I said, I can share the file I created, so you have at least an outline of all the points that we collected over the past days. Yeah.
Okay.
If you could share that, that'd be great. That would work for my notes.
Yeah, I would have just went now from the thing that is written on GitHub.
Okay, yeah, it's pretty much the same I've written down, so yeah,
Okay.
we can do that.
Let me share my screen and then we can go ahead. Let's go. Where's Discord? How do I share? Oh boy. Here, share. Yeah, and then
you will
screens.
Record.
Yeah.
You will record.
Record? Yeah, if someone can record the meeting, then go ahead, yeah.
Is there anyone else we're missing?
If somebody writes in chat, then I'll add them.
Okay. Good. Yeah, I would have just opened this webpage here where we put some notes. So Luis had raised a bunch of points. I had raised just a few points here. I guess we can just go from top to bottom, see how far we get. We don't have to cramp everything into this one meeting. If we, end somewhere because we have so much to say, then we can schedule another one next week and keep talking about things. Yeah, I mean, I guess people have already looked at code. Current status quo for this repository that we plan to use is that we still don't have the CMake build done for Visual Studio 6, but it's almost done. All tools except the Max plugin are compiling and linking and running, I think. Yeah, so hopefully it will be done soon and then we can go from there. And yeah, there's many topics that we can talk about. I hope everyone can see this. It's large enough. So as you may have seen, there's like a little bit of chaos in the repository that EA has left, but also good things that we can pick up, and obviously the code that we want to continue on. And yeah, so there's some general things like there's a big question as to like what do we do with file locations, with naming, with casing. As you may have seen, some of the points where, like, for example, hopefully this is large enough, is maybe a bit small, but yeah, the source files, the include files, they are physically separated. So that's one thing. The namings, yeah, most files have camel case, right? So uppercase at the front and some uppercase in the middle to make them readable. Some files start with lowercase, some are completely lowercase, others are completely uppercase. The included directories in various files are all over the place. So that will not compile on non-Windows platforms out of the box. Yeah, so the question is, what do we want to do? If we do things, then there could be merge conflicts when outside collaborators want to merge changes, integrate changes, and yeah, there might be conflicts with different names or files or moved files. So there's a consideration. So we need to make a careful decision. Are there opinions on this?
General VT mentions in chat, if we ever want to port this game for multiple platforms, the names or the includes have to be updated. Windows is the only system that is case insensitive, and include a lowercase a.h for the file, uppercase a.h only works on Windows.
To be fair, I think Mac OS also by default is case insensitive.
Are there any tools which can do one similar pattern for every file?
Yeah, so Omniblade has mentioned that he would like to make them all lowercase everywhere. My concern with this is that it decreases readability. I've already seen this in the Time project where all the files are lowercase, and sometimes I look at this and I take 2 seconds to figure out, okay, that's the kind of word that it is meant to say. So there's that. I guess it's easy to then type, okay, every file is just lowercase. But yeah, it doesn't help readability, and it's also inconsistent with all EA files. Like all game files, all code files, everything is camel case. So if we make it lowercase, it violates the EA standard, so to say.
It's Danish Knight here. First thought is that if you open up a question like that to a room full of engineers, you're going to get as many answers as there are engineers. So it might make sense for the project leaders to have a think and come up with some sensible standards and then perhaps propose those or enforce those, because you're always going to have someone that's going to say, well, I want snake case, I want Pascal case, and the religious wars of formatting has never been fully quenched in the history of programming.
I would go so far as to say that EA has made this decision for us, given that we're not really going to be touching the asset files where possible, or so I would expect. I think we should just keep it consistent with the asset files.
The asset files, they don't have consistency either, to be honest with you.
Oh, right, okay.
I think that's also sort of where this discussion is coming from, that there is no real consistency across the EA code base. I mean, there's a lot of places where it is indeed as says on the scribe, but there's also places, specifically libraries, that just are completely different.
Okay. Yeah, it seems Tarnished Knight has a point there that people will prefer different things. After all, there are so many kind of styles when it comes to programming, not just file names, but also like how people name their functions and classes and variables. Yeah, everyone does it differently. Yeah, maybe it needs to be a decision from someone, and then we stick to it. Yeah, I don't know.
I think
Honestly,
it's nice if folders are uppercase and files like CPP and header files are lowercase. It's a preference at the end.
yeah, a
I
lot
think
of
it
older
really matters
files are.
what.
Sorry, go
I
ahead.
don't think it really matters what we do as long as we pick a standard and stick to it. It's just a matter of how we go about picking it and who do we make unhappy by doing it.
I do have a question to pose, which
It's usually like a standard of the languages. Like C# and JavaScript have different file namings.
so EA has like a whole bunch of different things going on in this project, but is there anything that predominantly wins across the board, or are we really just in a mess of it as far as how it's already built?
I think it's mainly camel case.
Yeah, no, not camel case, Pascal case, no?
With a capital letter at the front, right?
When it starts with a capital, yeah.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
At least that's what I've seen.
Yeah, I'd agree. From what I've seen, that's predominantly the style that most of the files are named in.
Because if we follow what's most prevalent, then we'll have the least amount of overall changes. That's my thought.
Yeah, that's reasonable. Mm-hmm.
I think, from my perspective, snake case would be preferable because in cases where capitalization is nuked, it's still readable, and we can all just nuke all caps in case someone commits something wrongly. I think that's the easiest way to go, and it prevents any issues with Windows not dealing with case sensitivity.
I mean, yes, snake case has my preference as well, but if I'm thinking about it from like the current code base point of view, it would require changing basically everything. Which is sort of why I didn't really want to like recommend it here. I don't know.
We should be able to use slang, CLang, to handle the formatting.
Okay, well,
For
we
the
have...
format and tidy tools, yeah.
Yes, I believe we're referring to the file names, the titles, and everything.
Okay, to me it sounds like we have varying opinions on this. Maybe we give it a bit more thought, and maybe we have a poll, and then we make a decision, and then we run with this. I don't have a strong preference myself. I probably would prefer the Pascal case or camel case, whatever it's called. But yeah, if we go all lowercase or with snake case, it's probably fine. Yeah, I can only say with Time project, I was not so happy with the all lowercase. It just made it confusing to read.
I think the case for snake case is quite a compelling reason. I've run into the issue with capital I next to L, for example, in Pascal and Camel case.
As I say, I'm not wedded to any particular style. I'm quite happy to just go with whatever, as long as we all agree on it and go with it and stick to it.
I think if we're going to get a push towards snake case, then we'd need someone who's prepared to put in the work and make sure that that's actually sorted out across the board. Because as Arctic Dolphin has said, that's going to be a lot of work to, well, it's going to be effort to switch that over. And if we've got community members who are prepared to put in the effort to make that happen, then perhaps that won't be quite so much of an issue.
Okay.
Also put it up to a vote, like right here, right now. See what people prefer from there.
I have no strong preference. I think just getting that main thing is just to at least do something going forward, because if someone adds new files, then we need to take care of that now before people add too much stuff.
Yeah, it needs to be done
Leggy,
early.
can you make a poll in chat then?
We can do the poll afterwards. Let's
right.
focus on talking. We can do the
let's
polling
move
later.
on.
It would also be nice if the poll is only for programmers, so that not some artists, designers, and whatnot just pick a random object.
Yeah.
That's just
But
we can
snake
we can
case looks better.
Yeah, so beautiful. Okay, so the file casings aside, the file locality, do we want to have this includes and source split, or would we like to dump them all into one folder? What are your opinions on this?
Is it quite uniform across the code base?
I mean, again, for me, I don't have a particularly strong preference. It's probably easier to stay with the way it is. I only really like doing the separate includes for like libraries. To be honest, they're going to be shared with other people rather than like a single project like this. It makes the most sense just have the headers all together for this sort of project. That's just how I feel about it.
Tarnish Knight, you had a question?
Oh yeah, I was just saying, is it completely uniform across the code base that they do this with the two directories?
Not everywhere. So game engine, yes, but the tools, they have it like all dumped into a single folder. So there are inconsistencies.
So if we standardize one way or the other, there's going to be work to align the code bases. Personally, what I've been working on, things generally seem to be in the same directory, and that seems to work out quite conveniently. As it's been said previously, that if you were making libraries and you're exposing the headers separately, that does make sense to have the external libraries visible and easily identifiable, perhaps in a separate directory. But for most stuff, yeah.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I think game engine is included as like a library in tools, right? So that the tools can work with game engine functionality. So maybe that's why the split makes sense there.
Yes, we could fix the inconsistencies. The question is, how do we fix the inconsistencies?
Well, we would move the files from one folder to another and adjust.
I know that. I was referring to what Sorcerer posted in the chat. I apologize. I should have clarified. General Beatty says, in my opinion, the refactoring or renaming should not be the most difficult part, just a bit time consuming. Once there is a decision, we can simply update the code base as much as at a time as we can and make tooling for it.
We're not getting a huge amount of discussion on the chat here. I do think that maybe this is something that maybe someone can take away, have a think about these matters, and come up with a proposal. I think engineers are probably better at.
What I find most ironic about the code
proposal.
base is that the bits that are split up are the game engine stuff that are split with the extra includes, and all the stuff under libraries, which you'd logically think would be more suited to having that kind of include split, don't seem to.
I guess one of the better questions is whether or not the current split up is an imposition to what we're trying to do here or not. We could spend a lot of time reinventing the wheel on a lot of stuff, but if it's not really in the way, then there's not a big reason to tackle it in the first place.
Well, if we do any changes, we need to do them now, after we have like the initial build setup done, because doing it later becomes unfeasible. Yeah.
Even if we don't change the entire engine now, we can at least establish something going forward.
So I guess it is the folder structure, would the change that we're talking about there be a big deal for us?
Well,
Mostly it handles. What's our go ahead, Zion?
I think technically it's a small change. I assume it's just a bunch of refactoring, but it is consequential because it will make contributing to this repository more difficult for everyone who already has a repository forked from the original, where the folder structure is different. And then yeah, it won't be as easy as just like, okay, select this one commit, integrate. Doesn't work like that so easily.
Right. So if we do that, are we getting something out of that aside from making it difficult for people who have the EA version?
That's a good question. I mean, it's probably preference. Do we want? Is it okay for us to touch two folders to put two files? Because typically, when you create a new code file, you put the header and a CPP. So you need to visit now both folders to put these files, and they're separate, right? So typically, if you have a code where these things, the header and the CPP, are together, you just need to go to one location, put the two files down, right? So that's the only thing, really.
The other thing I'm a little bit wary about is when EA updates their repo with version 1.05, that's also something we have to deal with, unless we decide not to.
No, we will
update
have to integrate that.
Yeah, Agent just basically posted that same thing. Has anyone given Agent the stage, by the way? He is a programmer, I believe, or they are a programmer. Yeah, she is a programmer. I'm tired. Thank you.
I'll add her.
Thank you. Yes, Lewis also states that this argument is also relevant for C-lang formats.
Which argument?
I believe they're referring to the folder structure change. But they can correct me if I'm wrong on that.
Yeah, absolutely. If you clean format the whole code base, you cannot apply patches from people anymore that started from the EA repo. So that's kind of a strong argument against clean formatting the whole code base.
Yeah,
I think we should try to maintain compatibility with the EA repo as long as we can. If it's in the way of something we're trying to achieve, that's a different discussion. But like if it's just about personal preference, the compatibility I think is more important right now while we wait for 105.
Yeah, it's absolutely a good point. I mean, if we stay with everything original, then that's the best way to collaborate with everyone because, yeah, there won't be any changes. I assume that short term, not changing anything, no formatting changes, no file changing. Short term, it's the best. Long term, I'm not so convinced. Long term, I think it's better if like these decisions were sorted early, good decisions, right? So we would have to make the right decision. Because then at some point we would say, oh, this would actually be nice if we had done this or that, because we have come so far and, you know, everyone is just contributing to this one code base at this time. And, you know, everyone is merging there anyway. Then, you know, there's no more point with having this outside collaborators anymore, right? Possibly. Although I think that there's a good chance that there will be more than one main line going on. So I assume that like this project is not the only one. I can imagine that there will be mods that build their own path. And so there could still be cherry picking going back and forth.
Is it maybe an idea to hold off on the formatting and renaming of stuff until we start looking at moving away from VC6? Because at that point, we're going to basically diverge from the EA repo anyways.
Yeah, I mean, so our current goal is that, yeah, as you mentioned, so we probably will have a VS6 mainline and a modern one, right? Because the assumption is that if we upgrade anything, then there will be a 1.04 original mismatch, right? So yeah, it's reasonable to assume that the VS6 mainline will be more pristine than the modern one. Yeah, but I think we are mainly concerned about the mainline, right? Because this will be long term our mainline, and the VS6 it will eventually just fade away, right, when we no longer need it.
I have a sort of thought question. Is all based on all we've just said, is reformatting the files and the folders a hard fork of the general code base?
Not in and of itself, it wouldn't be, would it? It would just mean that there's a very large diff against the repositories that are going to be out there. It'd make cherry picking off of another fork more difficult. You'd probably have to do it manually rather than being able to just use git cherry pick.
Right.
If we've renamed the files as well, like we talked about in the previous item, it's not even cherry pick. It's you'll have to.
That is a good question. If we're going to make
some-
such changes to the code base anyway and reformat it, we might want to consider properly hard forking it so we're no longer in the sort of the Git network with the original repository, and that will reduce the tendency of people to try and create pull requests against us that aren't already forked from us.
So for the major projects that are like Justin's project, is that off EA's or is that off the R1 with the general?
It's off EA's.
So if because there's a lot of stuff going on, he's taking a lot of commits from people going on at the moment, and that's possible. I don't know whether you'll be looking at using that for future work or whatever, but if we do all this work, that's going to make it very difficult to integrate anything from what Justin and other repositories have been doing. And they're doing a lot of very interesting, very good work that will help us in the long term. So I don't know. There's a part of me thinking we're too late. We're too late on this. I have a feeling we are locked in with whatever EA's done, files, directories, everything. Too much is going on. We've got hundreds of people doing things going off in all sorts of directions. This needed to be stopped day one, and action taken, and people told, right, this is what we need to do. A week on, so much has happened. I'm not sure that it's going to be feasible to recover this and put this into a separate directory structure until everything's calmed down.
Well, I would say I don't think it's an issue of being too late. I think there's a lot of stuff happening, and it's unclear at this moment how easy it'll be for us to integrate our work into what the rest of the community and whatever EA decides to do is going to be. We are assuming that it's just going to be 105 and that's it, but EA could make changes as EA decides they want to respond to this either which way that they want to. They could integrate different functionality or try to patch something. So we might have to roll in additional code at some point. It's something to think about.
And regarding Justin's repo, I mean, I don't know if you've seen have you seen the diff on his repo compared to EA's? It's already like almost 10K files changed and millions of lines. I mean, it's already, I think, hard to integrate with Justin as it is.
I'm not so worried about that aspect. I mean, having slow start, yeah. The important thing is that we get work done, and I think there's a clear goal as to fixing the game. Yeah, I'm not so worried about this. I mean, for me personally, the time horizon is years and not weeks, so I'm not scared about this. But yeah, it's certainly there's a big argument, like having outside collaborators being able to easily create pull requests from their older changes is nice to have. And collaboration between different projects. Maybe there's a path where we can say, okay, maybe we just apply like really simple formatting changes. So for example, there's a possibility to just do a whitespace formatting, and typically the merge tools, they have an option to ignore whitespace on merging, so that you don't get conflicts on white conflicts because the merge tool already handles it. So this would be a possibility that we just say, okay, we fix all the indentation issues and stuff like this. And then, yeah, if the people use the merge tool, then the merge tool takes care of this white space. So maybe that's an option.
So Lewis said, what would be EA's incentive to continue working on the code? I've heard rumors that there were some expectations on the release of 0 Hour to Steam, and the sales numbers have absolutely destroyed those forecast numbers. They exploded well beyond what they forecast, so there is definitely a commercial incentive to continue attracting those numbers.
Okay, how about we jump to other topics? Yeah, maybe we can give it a bit more thought and then maybe make a vote on the formatting. But yeah, maybe it's better to not do anything with it. We'll see. Okay, yeah, we have more. I mean, yeah, code formatting was already covered here. There was a topic of code commenting, and I already heard some people not so happy with, I think Alex made some comments, hey, remove these code comments, because I asked someone to, hey, document your change here. So there are two ways of documenting. Well, three ways, right? So with Git, you make a commit, and on pull request text, you have the documentation. That's a typical way. Code commenting, this is something we do in our data branch, where maybe I can pull it up here. I mean, similar to how EA goes here pedantic. Basically, what we do when we touch data, we always, let me make it a bit larger so you can see it. We always add like what we actually change, so that the next time we revisit it, that we can see exactly, okay, we have touched this thing, blah, blah, blah. So we have a little bit of context, which typically is great. I mean, I can understand that maybe this is upsetting when it's like within functions. Well, this is not a function, it's just like a definition. But if it's like in a function block in code and then, it gets unholy, maybe that's not good. But maybe if you have like a function or a class and then you put like a comment above it and you say something about it, maybe that's a good thing to give context for the next person who's touching some things, because otherwise they would also always need to study the Git history. Another thing, and that's what I would really appreciate, is if we can do YAML formatting, YAML documentation, which we also do in our data changes. Let me pull this up here real quick. Projects. Data, no. Here, design changes here. So basically, every change we make, we create a YAML file, and then in the YAML file, we write. Let me pull this up. We write like a title, what this change is, a date, then one more sentence about the fix or multiple fixes or multiple refactors or whatever, some labels, what this is about, a link to the pull request, the authors. And what this allows is to then generate a change log out of these records. So whenever we make a fundamental change, like let's say fix game crash when launching a game, yeah, or fix particle glitches, whatever, yeah. Then we create a YAML file according to this, and then whenever this thing is retouched, then it can be appended to this YAML file, or it can be corrected in the YAML file, and then out of this, we generate change logs in various formats, whatever is needed, like a MD file, or could generate the HTML file out of this, or whatever, right? So this would be something I advocate to go for. Yeah, so I guess it's, yeah, please.
Yeah, sorry, two things. Sorcerer86PT asked, could we not make a script to simply generate that YAML from a pull request?
That's a great question, and yes and no. You can do this, but then yeah, what do you do? What do you do if you just want to edit the YAML? Like if the Git history is your documentation, then you need to be extra careful to not mess it up, because then you cannot change it after it's done. You would have to rewrite history if you wanted to edit that history, right? So if you have it like as a standalone file, you can always go back and touch it up and fix it, right? So it gives you more flexibility. Yeah, it's maintenance overhead, but I think it's much easier than hard coding it into the history.
So, I've been working on so I have experience with a community known as Space Station 13, a bit of a niche community, but they're quite venerable. I mean, they've been doing stuff for over 20 years now. Most of their current systems that they do there, they do have a YAML system. They also combine this with the Git blame system. Basically, what they do is they either create a changelog file, or they use a script to automatically generate it from the pull request. Both are options, and both can be used at once if you want. There is a webhook or there is a task in Git that automatically takes those separate YAML files and generates a big changelog. Basically, with this changelog, it tracks the dates and the timestamps, so that way you know, okay, so these were merged for this version. This is what's new with this latest version. And it's automatically built from the YAML files. So basically, they have a giant changelog dating back 20 years, and you can go through that changelog. You can tell exactly when that change was done, exactly what was changed, and also who authored it. An automated workflow like that is something that I would recommend. It would basically just expand on your existing system, and it would also work with the Git blame system.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not opposed to making it more elegant. Yeah, I mean, currently the way it works, there is the YAML files are created by hand, and then there is a Python tool that then processes this folder with all the YAMLs. It's like a JSON where you can specify, okay, please process this folder with this wildcards, and then please generate me a MD file with these filters, like these labels, exclude these labels or include these labels, and then off you go. But yeah, we can have different kind of things to make it better. But yeah, in the end, I think there's great value with this, because then you don't scramble with information as to what has actually changed, but you can always present the players what has actually changed in great detail. And I think players will appreciate this, because there are many players who want to know exactly what was changed, right? And so we need we need to be diligent with the documentation, especially anything that concerns gameplay in any way. Like typically, I think players are not so concerned about upgrades to graphics and audio, right? But as soon as it touches gameplay, they get nervous. Yeah.
Maybe it's possible to add some sort of GitHub workflow that when a PR is submitted, it will generate uh, a YAML file and add it to that PR. And then on a merge, it can automatically generate the MD file. I can look at that.
Yeah, I get anything that makes it easier. Sounds good. Sorry.
Like, isn't possible to link APR to an issue? So if APR is created, it's linked to an issue, and the details of why this change has been done is in the issue, and you can even tag the issue if it's a gameplay or a bug.
I don't think that's the core issue here. I think the core issue is that the changelog needs to be managed diligently. not the linking with the issues, because I know that there are some PRs that are not linked to issues.
Yeah, so all right. If it's not linked to an issue, it's not a concern of a player, right? It's merely a code change then.
So Scorpion has just raised a good point in chat there of like, has anyone spoken to someone from like OpenTTD or OpenRCT2? I think more generally, I think it might help us, given the way that we're talking about everything at the moment, if we could maybe get someone from another open source game community in to kind of tell us about what it is like contributing and what they would change and what they would do differently. If we can find someone that has like a few years experience contributing to one of the many open source games that are out there, it'd be really interesting to see what they would recommend in terms of how we do a changelog, for example. Another thing I'm thinking is like how we track decision making, whether we want to put that in Git as well. Like, for example, if we do come out of this meeting deciding we want to go for snake case, where are we writing that down and how are we announcing it? Those are all important things that amongst at least the developer team we need to know. And I'm sure that this is already a problem that has been solved amongst some other open source game development group.
I was going to mention someone, but he already unmuted himself, so I think he's going to answer this question.
Oh, right, okay.
Okay. Whoops. Should I get quiet? Had a nice introduction there from Arctic Dolphin. Yeah, so I come from the Beyond All Reason community as one of the engine developers for that. And I think if we were to analyze quite what we were doing with that project, which has been a project that has existed for quite a while, you might be slightly disappointed with how sophisticated we are. We've gone through a lot of pains, but I think our policy has been that it's a delicate balance, and our experience is probably slightly different to Zizon's, in that we found that our community are very particular about balance changes. So our balance council are very particular about the changes. Yeah, every change that goes in gets documented, and we've got a system where it actually gets uploaded onto a website as well. Off the top of my head, I don't know the exactly how that's all been linked together. So if that was something of interest, I'd probably link you to someone who from the project would know a bit more about that. But in other areas of the application, the project specifically, like the engine, for example, people are. I think the players are only in passing curious about what's going on. So if there are gameplay changes, for example, changes to the pathfinding, the players just generally want to understand generally what to expect if it's explained in a general sense of how it impacts their game, but it doesn't need to be like a huge level of detail or anything like that, because they'll figure it out for themselves, is what we found. But I don't know, the generals community may be a lot more particular in their expectations of what's presented to them. But in bar, unit changes in terms of their stats, the community can be very particular. But for more general things, like gameplay changes, like the physics of a tree being knocked over or something like that, or how chain reactions of buildings exploding and stuff like that, which can impact obviously how you interact with the game. They're just sort of interested to know that has changed, and they're more inclined to go and explore and understand what's happened with that. So our notes tend to be a lot more general, the way we capture and communicate. That's that stuff. We, in the engine, we're not, we don't have an automated process per se on that. When we go through releases, it's actually someone just double checking all the commits to create a summary of what's actually changed, and then we submit that to the testers. when we go through the testing phase.
Right. Well, that's good to hear, honestly, that there isn't a perfect solution out there. My intention of asking that question was more like, could we save ourselves some time in inheriting whatever solution is out there? But it sounds like some inventing will need to be done regardless. So yeah, no, I mean, thanks for the context there. And also sorry for not knowing your credentials.
Oh no, it's okay. I haven't exactly advertised it to everyone that's ever spoken to me. I've said it a lot, though, admittedly, on this around. But yeah, I try not to go too overboard with that. I'm sure you guys would just scoop me up and ship me off as if I make too many noises about it. But I think if you can find someone in 0 AD, I think they've got some systems in place. They're quite organised from when I spoke to them, because they actually had a dedicated organizer, stroke community manager, stroke production manager, who made sure things were organised and moved in order. So maybe it's worth trying to find a contact with that and see what they say and promote.
You could see about some cross-platform discussion, cross-project discussion.
Yeah, the concept of any sort of project manager or a governing body existing is something that I guess we're sort of doing right now by having this conversation. But I don't think it's feasible for us to continue to include like everyone on every decision. I mean, I know for one, I've only been lucky to make these meetings the few times they've been on, but it might be worth I don't know, electing or like coming up with a core group within I might like sorry, I just see you turning me down there. Like a core group within the community that does make these decisions. And then I mean I doubt there would be much pushback on
You've
stuff.
suddenly gotten very quiet.
Oh sorry. Okay, so it is just a normal volume. Okay, we'll leave it where it is. Yeah, sorry. I'm just saying, should we have governing bodies for things like balance change, for technical decision making, things like that?
I can say some words about this because over the last years I had a lot of interactions with community when it came to these kind of changes. So I can tell you that committee members are very protective over the current status quo when it comes to things. There's always people who want to branch out and explore, but many community members are very conservative. And I think here Community Outpost also wants to go a very conservative route, which matches this kind of sentiment typically. So any kind of changes that touch game state, and that includes bug fixes, right? So there are many game-related things that we fix. Like, so for example, there's this bug where the hackers selected in a group, you start hacking, and then the hackers that already hack will then stand up and sit down again and then continue hacking, right? So that's a code bug. If you change this, you change game. Most players probably will be happy with this, but there will be bugs. When we fix them, they will be controversial. So anything that touches game state has to be labeled as controversial change, or most of them. Some maybe not. Right? So, and yeah, all this needs to be documented from my point of view. Yeah, I agree with Tarnished Knights that like this the stuff that is not so interesting for gameplay. Typically, players are not so eager to understand everything that's going on as long as it just looks nice. What players are also very interested in is anything networking and anything performance. So if the game runs faster and there are less lags, players will be very happy. And then, yeah, of course, bug fixes. But we should try and strive for trying to make game logic changes configurable, right? So try to think of ways to implement it so that different kind of customers, aka different kind of patches or mods, can configure the behavior. right? So engine exposes functionality to the ini files, which are these text files that you can, which have like simple scripting functionality. And if we can like make things configurable and don't force them in code, then I think that's great, because then they are less of a controversial change, because then these patches and these mods have to opt in, right? I think that's a great way to extend functionality on game logic, but not make projects upset.
I'm worried about that a bit. The thing is, every option we add, there are now 2 branches, or potentially more branches, that we need to maintain, make sure it doesn't crash or bug out. The more options we add, the more code debt we add, and that concerns me very much. So I'm going to say this: we need to be looking at a brand new player who just entered the game, who has never seen a Command and Conquer game before, or at the very least hasn't played 0 Hour before. We need to make sure that whatever we fix, it improves it for them. It might impact the top 1% of players. However, I'll be honest, this is going to sound controversial, but they probably just need to deal with it, because we cannot absolutely 100% maintain the original bugs. I just got to be honest with you. That's not feasible. It introduces depth for our contributors, and we cannot be doing that.
Can you give an example of such a thing?
Well, the one thing I'm worried about right now that I see as potentially controversial, I fixed a bug where nationalism and the patriotism upgrade will provide their fire rate boost for no matter if you have horde bonus, even though it specifically says in the manual and the upgrade list that it boosts the horde bonus. I see that as a potentially controversial change. However, that is something that is very obviously a bug, because it's obvious the game makers intended it for the bonus to only apply when horde bonus is applied. But there are some players in the professional leagues who may decide that this is an unneeded balance change, and that I'm worried about.
So I just want to say, Ziz, on one thing regard to having a sort of configuration option or flag for every balance change. The other way to look at this is the way that other competitive games handle it, where a version of the game is just that. Like, if you consider the differences even between generals and 0 Hour, there's a good reason, like even if you were just playing the 3 base generals, that there would be like subtle differences at expert level between those factions. If we release in the future a 106, I don't think we have to tiptoe too much, so long as it is possible to play 104 and 105. Like, if we aren't permanently tarnishing, or not tarnishing, but sort of deviating from the original game, if we can provide an environment where a user can get the sort of old version of the game, it's still not buggy, but the balance is different, and the way specific units interact, like the examples that were just given, those changes were made. But then we have a new version where those things are fixed. It means that we don't have to continue to maintain the, well, let's be honest, buggy code that resulted in those imbalances in the first place as we move forward and release new versions. But players who want, like pro players who want to play specific versions of the game because that's the version that they're good at, can continue to do so, even as this community grows.
I guess a good question to ask here is, what exactly are we expecting the scope of this project to be? The community patch is obviously supposed to be a bug fix, but when Legionnaire did that first meeting with us, he was very adamant about the idea of not handling balance changes throughout this first 12 months. And I have to kind of agree with the sentiment there. As a programmer, I kind of see where he's coming from if we start tackling these like bug adjacent things that change the actual gameplay, then someone will get something like a fatal error, and they'll be like, well, why didn't you fix that? I don't know if we should be dealing with that at this stage or not. I feel like maybe there's more fundamental stuff we should be dealing with here.
The main thing is a lot of these gameplay adjacent bugs that you talk about. A lot of them are very simple, like the horde bonus thing. I just had to move under I just moved that under a bracket that it should have been moved under. Some of the critical error bugs, those can be a lot more difficult to figure out, and so those can take time to resolve. And right now, we also don't really have a test bed with the VC6 build not being quite ready.
Yeah, there's also another thing I just thought about. Like if, for example, we're going to say 1.04 is is the version that pro players are going to play on because all of them are used to it and all the tournaments are going to happen on it. But we do bring out like newer versions where the code where there's changes in engine. What happens when, for example, a security vulnerability surfaces? We then have to backport all that work into older versions that may or may not be popular with, well, I guess only into the versions that are popular, but it would still be work. That's what
I
I'm a
think
little bit concerned about.
Sorry. I think if players opt to use older versions, then just like Microsoft and Co., we basically say, you're on an older version. We don't support that older version. I mean,
my expectation for our start will be that we will have a branch that is 1.04 compatible, and then we have another branch, our main line, which goes further ahead, right? Where we already start tackling more things. And then any change that is not changing incompatibilities with gameplay, we put into this pristine branch where we do just bug fixes that can be done, like 3D shadow crash fixes and so on. We can put there, and then we cherry pick that into our main line, and the main line just already advances to greener pastures. And so at the start, community patch will evolve slowly, but that's fine. And we will just it will slowly grow, and more tech will be developed in the background, but that's fine. And then it would just slowly pick up our changes, and eventually it will make the switch and abandon the compatibility, and then it can benefit from a broader set of changes and fixes.
I largely agree with that. Yeah.
Omniblade brings up a good point. My thought on the community accepting the patches or not, they are lucky to have a choice. What are they going to do if the next EA patch fixes some of these bugs?
I don't think it will be an issue. Like you can even put bugs in a category. For example, if you're fixing the China dozer, like rotating around, it's a pathfinding issue mainly. So if you push that fix, and if it fixes the dozer, but like the bus's movement is slightly altered, like I think like the players, like they will have to decide if they want this patch that have the China dozer moving correctly or not. But I think like if the patch have some advantages, the players will take it and will be okay with some maybe changes in other places. Like the important thing is that the patch fixes something major. It doesn't like only fixes the fire speed. Maybe they don't like that. But if you fix something major in that patch, I think it will be accepted. And at the end, it's like the streamers, I think the big streamers opinion that also can shift the community about these patches.
I don't think this is just about messaging and like trying to shove our changes through. I think there's a more fundamental idea. No, I'm just saying. I think there's a more fundamental.
I think if you fix a major issue in a patch, if it changes something minor, some other places, it will be fine. But the important thing is that you feel a big improvement in some area of the game regarding the gameplay.
I agree. If we make changes, should all pull requests should justify. First off, there are three things that a PR needs to state. First off, the intention of the PR. It needs to also state what it changed and the goal of the changes.
Yeah, I agree with that. And the goal should be a big improvement.
Can I say something on the versioning and stuff? I do think that if EA releases a new patch, yeah, we're gonna have a bit of a hard time putting things together. But I think we have to remember that CC Hyper, the main guy, is very much on our side. We can literally communicate with him and say what is going to be changed, what isn't going to be changed, and more importantly, we might even be able to tell him, don't touch that, and see how he responds. I think he's going to be collaborative rather than really getting in our way and stuff like that. That's just the feeling I get. That's one thing I wanted to say. Another thing is that compatibility, in my opinion at least, is essential for the beginning to help with the adoption to go to the new patch. If we don't have that, then people will always view the new patch as a weird thing that's not, what they're used to. So yes, ideally players will in the future have the possibility to switch between classic 1.04 and maybe a new set of balance rules and stuff that would have, for example, nationalism fixed. But for now, it's all about having compatibility and trying to get people to feel comfortable installing the patch. And the patch itself, I don't know if this has been discussed yet, but it's probably going to use a launcher that could then auto update as well. And basically, we need to get more people on board first. I think that will be a very important starting point.
I agree with those ideas. I think you're in the right frame of thinking on this.
I am going to state this. I am fundamentally opposed to branching or needless options because of the code that I mentioned. However, at least at first, limiting our changes to encourage mass adoption would be nice. And Lord Kian is asking to talk. Yeah, they're in the audience right now.
I added him to stage. At least invited him. He needs to accept though. Yeah. He can talk if he accepts.
Yes.
I do want to briefly point out while we wait for him, because we have source code here, there's an opportunity for modders to basically do whatever they want. So we're in a little bit of a different place than we were before, but it's also like a wonderful opportunity for people to make whatever kind of balance changes they feel like. So if the professional players want to have a professional balance that is maintained by their own team of people, they can absolutely do that. And I feel like when we make balance changes in the community patch, we are sort of going into the realm of what modders could be doing. So I don't know how much of that we want to assume ourselves.
I think there needs to be stages for this. First, we would need the original game working as it is, with all the bugs and nothing fixed. And then you need to decide which bugs, for example, everyone hates, everyone in the community. That would include something like compatibility issues, mismatches. Everyone hates that. Nobody wants that. We would all wish that was gone. And then you can move on to other things that some people might feel like they like. For example, I know some people that would prefer the bit of delay that they have when they move units because of the lag. That's a thing. They would be not used to it if that was gone. and then you would move to other things like the patriotism and the nationalism stuff. That's like gameplay, like it's really hardcore gameplay stuff. But I think like the main point is that we should start with the things that everyone hates, and then we can move on to other things. And like every game on the planet releases, like multiplayer game, I mean, like they release patches normally, like it's a normal thing for the game development. And like it introduces like new meta and like new options. It's actually fun to do that. It's good to change the game from
I
like
agree with both of you actually, but I think that maybe the way to handle it is to empower the modders and developers more. So maybe the real solution is somewhere in the middle, where we do keep these options in the code, but the options that we don't ship, we don't officially support.
Yeah, I also think there's a bit of a misunderstanding of optionality. I mean, if we look at the game already has a lot of optionality, right? I mean, if you look at the ini file, you have a lot of objects with different kind of modules and settings, and the game is built like this, right? And exposing more optionality to customize things, I think that is certainly in line with modder expectations, player expectations, and I don't see another way, that because if we just make hard decisions and we just change something, and things cannot be, they cannot configure it, then it's a bad experience for everyone, and it puts us under pressure as well, because then we make this decision for others, right? So I think it's always great to think about ways to make something configurable. I agree that there will be changes which it makes no sense if, like, not every bug needs to be opt out, right? That doesn't make sense. But there are some things where it is considerate to consider the feedback of the community. And I think that's a job of Community Outpost leadership, to be in the dialogue with community leaders and community in a broader sense, to figure out like what needs to be paid attention to, where we cannot just make our own decisions, right? Because we need to make decisions that cater to the customer.
I have new idea. Not new idea. By the way, my microphone is okay?
Yeah.
Guys? All right. Since I also playing Asset Accord with a thing called Content Manager, it's a launcher. One of the video of season talked about restarting a game. But if we have executable a launcher and a game separately, imagine certain scenario. If people join the room and we have everyone in the room have the newest page, I'm not sure if networking will work. And if you know everyone in the room has the newest patch, also different version, they can start the game with newest patch. But if someone in the room is with patch 104, everyone starts 104 because it's mainly the default, or 105. The people, when they go to Steam and download the game, they let's say default state or official. So we have in this way some kind of flexibility. So these two parts of community with the default 105 or not 104, and the newest page, we can communicate in the room and they can decide which one game we can play. It's one idea.
I was already thinking about something like this. It's like Gen Patcher, Gen Tool, Gen Launcher, and Game Ranger all in one.
Yeah.
We just call it like Gen Hub or something, where all these compatibility issues can be dealt with before the game launches even.
Yeah, you would need like something like a launcher for the game, and through the launcher you can like pick everything. Like we already have something like this anyway.
Yes, this is my idea. Yeah.
Yeah.
I know Jason made a topic on this on the GitHub as well, so I think that's also something that should get some attention because ideally we'd ship up with the first patch as well, so that people have the chance to auto update.
Yeah, I think people should just argue at the discussions on GitHub. I think we are losing track here in this meeting right now.
Great.
Because this meeting was about where we're
Formatting.
starting, what language standards we want to use, code guidelines, and whatnot, and it became quite philosophical.
Yeah, we're getting ahead of ourselves.
As of before we move on, can I bring up an idea that I heard a little while ago? There was an idea that we could select the balance before the game start. So if we select no balancing, the game would be compatible with the original 1.4. So if we are about to do a balancing or we fix a game engine that breaks the compatibility, we could put the original code in our fixes, and if players choose not to go with our fixes, we can redirect to the old version. So
Sorry, go ahead.
yeah, because I usually play with a balance called 1.06, which is a somehow balanced version of the game. And if I want to play with other players who doesn't have this, I just take out the 1.6 patch and I could play with them. So if we put some sort of checkbox in the game, in the lobby, people would be able to play with others who doesn't have this, I don't know, balancing or game engine fix, but it will make the code base a little bit fatty. That's the entire idea.
Yeah, so I feel like we're still a little bit off the rails here. We don't know right now, according to this bullet point, like whether or not we're using C++11 or C++17, and we're already talking about launchers and multiplayer sessions and who should control what and how. And I don't think that's a bad discussion to have, but we should probably discuss some other stuff first.
Yeah, so
we need to get back.
Language
Sorry, go ahead.
standards, yeah. I mean, so current language standard in 0 hour is C++ 98. I think we all agree that this is not the way to go forward. I'm not even sure if anyone of us is comfortable with that kind of language standard. So probably we are looking at C++ 11 or beyond. Personally, I probably would be perfectly happy with C++ 17 because C++ 11 is lacking a few nice things here and there. Beyond C++ 17, I don't know if it's so worthwhile, but yeah, let's have a chat about that.
I think at W3D Hub for the Renegade engine that we are announcing tomorrow, we have adopted C++ 20, mainly for the file system improvements and a couple of other things that we use. Plus, one of our major programmers uses at work.
We use
I
virtual engine
think.
C++20 as well.
I think an important question to ask is what are the cons of using C++20? Pros and cons, like do we have any disadvantages?
Compatibility. If you use more modern versions of the language, then you have to use more modern compilers. Some of them are not fully finished, depending on what you're talking about. So implementations for modern C++ get pretty sophisticated, so some of it takes a long time to trickle in.
Mm-hmm. From what I understood, also like C++ 14 is the last version that's fully supported on Windows XP, if that is an actual target of ours.
I'm not so sure. I'm not so convinced on the need to support Windows XP, to be quite honest with you.
I'm assuming that's just from a development standpoint. Like once it's compiled, it'll run on Windows XP, but we just can't develop it on Windows XP. I assume.
Yes, that's possible, but it's also going to be a bit more complicated. But it should be possible to run even newer versions of C++ on old hardware, especially
Right.
Windows XP. That should actually work.
Yeah. So I guess the question is, what is everybody developing on right now, and like how current do we want to get with that? I mean, the safest option would be to pick something like 14 or 17, or I think 17 is probably safe. But somebody can tell me if I'm wrong, because sometimes these older sounding numbers are not as safe as they sound on paper.
Honestly, I mean, we're using 20 on our code base, and if we share with them, then I would go with 20 for the same reasons, just so we can make sure that whatever they do, we can incorporate into our project easier.
I agree with that. To me, it sounds good.
Does anyone have any major opposition to adopting C++ 20?
Take that as a no then.
Cool. Maybe we settled on something.
All right, so
quick move on before it all falls apart.
all right, so
Jinx
C++
it.
20, with no opposition to it, I think we're safe to say our project will adopt C++ 20 going forward. Going forward, just to be clear, I don't want to. It will take time to update the old code, and in some cases, it may be very difficult for compatibility reasons to update the old code. But going forward, any PRs that are adopted, they need to be compliant with C++ 20 standards.
All right. Nice to have a decision.
All right.
All right.
That's
What's
good.
next?
Okay, so next thing I mentioned here, code guidelines. So this is probably a bigger topic that probably needs to be researched, but generally I would like to raise this and pay a little bit of attention to, because perhaps there are some things that we would like to steer away, because there is something to say about the original code, and that is it uses a smaller set of features, which makes it easier to digest generally, right? So there's no like big amount of nested lambdas, right? So there are things that are simple, right? And the further we go up the chain with the C++ standards, then more features are in there, and people can do more complicated things. So the question is like, okay, do we want to discourage certain things or ban certain things? So for example, I mean, a common thing to ban is goto, right? That you rarely see that being used. It's typically discouraged. Another thing for me personally is the auto. It makes things harder to look at in reviews, for example, but also in the EDE if it cannot quickly, swiftly show you the type of something. So you need to hover it and then wait for IntelliSense to hopefully show you some nice symbols. So, that's always a question. Lambda can be great, but can also be abused. And I think there are also many others. So perhaps it makes sense to maybe gather some things and get some opinions.
Well, I think Goto, you're right, is universally hated on, and there's alternatives to that. I don't think that's going to be very controversial. As for other things, I think it's going to be down to whether it enhances the code and its readability or takes away from it. There are cases where I think auto is fine if you don't actually have to look anywhere else and you can easily infer its type, fine. But I agree there are cases where it can make things more difficult. Lambda can be a good thing, but it can also be a bad thing. I think this just, it needs to just come down to, say, code reviews and say, are you using it in an effective way? And is it helping us or hindering us? And that's the sort of pragmatic view I've taken with code reviews in the past, that we try not to be too overly strict, because it can be quite disencouraging towards contributors. I don't know if you have that problem, but in the Spring Engine we have a problem. If we have too many processes or we're too strict about things, then we scare contributors away, and then we don't have many contributions. The engine doesn't get developed as much. So that's my view on that. Is like, let's not be too strict.
I think I agree with that, and I was actually going to propose that myself. I don't think we should be overly strict specifically in regards to we will always ban that, with the exception of GoTo. GoTo can just die in a fire, to be quite honest. Uh, there's no reason to use it these days, and there are other ways to do that. Do whatever you're trying to do. But Auto, Lambda, all those things, there are uses for those, and we should be reliant on trusted code reviewers going in and looking at this and saying, "What are we doing? What are you doing there? Why are you using that?" And saying, "Okay, that makes sense," or "That is nonsense. Why aren't you just declaring that number as an int right there?"
Yeah, generally I agree with both of you. It's reasonable, but I do think there is certainly value in defining certain rules that are best practices. So there is like the ISO CPP already that does teach about best practices, and perhaps it's a good way. Like we could link to it, right? And here, please follow best practices, or we could like reiterate on certain things. Like so, for example, avoid new delete, use smart pointers, right? That's one thing.
One thing I do want to enforce right now, there is a lot of the code, especially with the really old Westwood libraries that use C-style code. Going forward, I want to go ahead and say no more of that. All new code and all refactored code must use C++ style code, object-oriented code.
I would actually prefer data oriented, but yeah, okay.
Yeah,
I second data orientated. Yeah, it's an engine dev.
that's
But
right.
well, I think we know what it means. It's supposed
I
to fit
agree.
in with the C++ way of doing things, appearance and that, rather
Yeah.
than being overly C.
Yeah. Well, so for example, another thing is like dealing with raw pointers. Like this is a topic. Like so, for example, a string view, right? You wouldn't want to put that as a member in a struct, right? Because it doesn't own the memory, and like it just is a raw pointer, and it looks kind of innocent from the outside, but it is sinister, and it can then lead to hard bugs down the line, right? So we need to be considerate about certain principles.
If you want to, I don't know. I've been hoping to try and introduce more in principles into the engine, which I'm working on. And one of those, you talk about like dangling, the potential of pointers and stuff, and that. Things like, at engine level, it might be something that you could apply wider across the grain. But as an engine programmer, we tend to have some rather stricter programming practices. For example, we've got the concept of transient and persistent data. So transient data is something that only exists within the context of a system. It doesn't exist outside of that, and it doesn't exist beyond an execution of the system. So like a subsystem, for example, like updating eco. And then you've got persistent, which exists across potentially multiple frames. And so the persistent stuff, we have more stricter rules in that you don't use pointers, end of story, for persistent game state, as in you use identifiers and so on and so forth, but that requires your data structures to be set up in a particular way to make sure that's not a performance drop or anything like that. But you try to avoid things like pointers in persistent data, because that then makes things like saving difficult, states. If we want to do more advanced features with the networking, like being able to roll back or anything like that, then the more pointers you use, the harder it gets to do that. If you want to say separate, your rendering from your sim, then you typically, if you want them in separate threads, then you have to share data. The less pointers you have, the better, and that kind of thing. But so you could introduce principles like that. Xenon, you talked about like avoiding certain things like that. Guidelines could be good, and I think that's certainly a good guidance. Maybe drill down into that and create a guidance book, if you will, that people could look at and consult.
Yeah, I'd like to sack the idea of a guidance book as someone who's like a beginner in C++, but pretty intermediate in other languages. It would be great to know what the right thing to do is in C++ before I even submit a PR. There's both the demotivation of having someone nitpick your code, but there's also the sort of becoming the bad guy if you're one of the good devs and being the one to nitpick every PR that comes in. So I definitely think having guidelines would help, especially with the number of like beginner C++ devs that have put forward interest.
Would there be anyone who's interested in guiding these guideline efforts and setting it up and gathering what we want to put there?
Yes, I think we could do that, but I don't want to be like or make it over complicated. I think that would be bad. I think the best idea to do would be there's probably like a lot of resources on this already somewhere on the internet. If someone that's like really good at C++ could compile a list of some guidelines that we can do. Like
Lewis brings up a good point. What if we just use Google's guidelines and we, I don't know, over time we adapt them to the needs of our project?
Yeah, but it should be documented somewhere, and ideally it shouldn't be an overly long list, right?
Yes.
The moment it becomes overly long, people won't read it anymore. So I think ideally you keep it to like 10 points, right? That you want to really emphasize that we find important, and the rest are
Yes.
less important, and I guess we can pick them up in review.
That's fair. I think if we just extract 10, here's some really important points to consider, and then we just link to a modified form of the Google guidelines for the rest of it, and we call it a day. And then we think we can do that ourselves independently.
Maybe less than 10, maybe more like 5.
Fair enough.
This could
The most
be
important question right now, though, where do we put the curly brackets?
where the sun don't shine. Sorry. Oh dear, the war of the curly brackets. I say that the key points there that could be a living document in the as you go through and use this project, you will probably find certain problems come up more often than others, and those will be the things you'll want people to focus on, or perhaps have the documentation focus on more. So be prepared to perhaps adapt it, as someone said, to the needs of the program as you use it more.
Yeah.
It's configurable also on the editor settings. That stuff.
But I think there's also being, I suppose there'll also be respectful to the code that's already there in EA, that they've established a particular way of working with the engine. So we've talked about looking at file directories and things like that, but they've got particular patterns that they follow in the code, practices in that. And would it make sense to continue to encourage people to continue to try and follow through in that style as well?
I would say only if they are reasonable. If they are not, then we should not adopt these. So, for example, it's not reasonable how they did reference counting, when the reference counter is not strictly tied to the smart pointer, but it's like an external thing, and you manually ref count, right? So they're bad principles, but they're probably also good ones. We need to identify that then.
Yeah, because from my experience, that most programmers, when they're working on code, tend to look at what code's actually there in front of them and go, well, that code's been accepted, so that must be obviously what I need to do as well. So I'll write my code in a similar fashion. And as you say, if we've got crazy reference counting manually done, then you don't want people to fall into that trap as well.
So one thing about I know, so Google's guidelines does actually cover this case. Specifically says follow our guidelines unless you're in a file that does not use our style. Then use the local style if you can, until we can get it fixed, or if we can get it fixed, because sometimes we can't fix it, such as in the case of things that may directly interface with Windows. So in this case, I would say most of our guidelines that are here are going to be going forward. There is absolutely no way that we can say the code will be fixed overnight. That's unrealistic. But the main thing we can do is just try and say, okay, going forward, let's do this way. We can keep cleaner code, that sort of thing.
That is a good point about when you're editing existing files. You should keep the style of the file when it comes to coding standards, because it's got to look like it's easier to read when it's all one style. If it's like 20 different people's styles all worked in, and I've had code like that before, and it does make it surprisingly more tricky to read.
I think we might need to discuss this at a later time, because I don't think we're going to get really anywhere discussing this with a large group. We probably need to go ahead and break out to a smaller group, honestly, to discuss this.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it doesn't hurt to gather some inputs from everyone right now.
Yeah, that's fair. Almond style. If we just keep with almond style for the brackets, does anyone have any issues with almond style brackets?
Sorry, what is this about?
This is
The
regarding
image in chat. There's a overview of different bracket styles.
I never heard this word.
Yeah, just scroll up a little bit to the image.
Yeah, it just means that curly brackets are on a new line, pretty much.
I would very much appreciate that, yes.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So basically, new line, no spaces is the almond style. I think that's the best way to go. So almond style brackets. Let's enforce that in C-Lang. Let's do it.
Yeah, I think
So
that's
we're deviating from the Google style guide.
That's probably the
Oh,
best
do
way.
they,
Okay.
do they do K&R then?
Pretty much.
I mean, we could do K&R too. It's K&R is most of the same, except the first curly brace goes right after the first parenthesis of the function, and I think we do use that in W3D Hub.
I've used both the two you mentioned, Elman's and K&R, and I don't have a problem with either.
Yeah, between the two of them, I would prefer K&R, but I'm fine either way.
The existing code base already uses Almond, so I would say we just stay with it.
They're both valid. The main thing is don't put white spaces. No white spaces. So no white space or G in U.
That sounds fair enough. So we've got one open curly brace that may or may not be on the same line, depending on the circumstances. The rest of it we've agreed on. That's 90% of the battle done, right? That might be as close as we get sometimes to some of these topics.
The endless battle of the curly braces.
Yeah. All right. Let's what's the next topic?
It's a bit of a mess in the current source code, as somebody pointed out.
I'd say if you do it and it makes if the code is readable and it looks all right and it aids readability, then I personally wouldn't have a problem. I've broken my own coding styles just to improve readability. So I think if it improves readability, then go for it.
All right, that's fair enough. So yeah, we could just say no consensus on almond K&R style, except to use either almond or K&R style.
That is if we don't use any formatting, auto formatting.
And we'll figure that out.
All right, next topic. Is that the use of auto formatter by any chance?
No, we already had that, but we didn't come to a conclusion there. Well, the next one, and I think that was already touched a little bit, that was about the code review rules and requirements. I can say, since someone mentioned it, I don't think you need to be, I think no one should feel intimidated or pressured under the code review, or feel like intimidated. Like the code review is there to help improve the quality, because the goal is that we submit quality changes, right? So we try to collaborate the best we can to find the best ways to make the code better for any particular merge request. So yeah, then obviously there's a question like, okay, how many reviewers we need? What is the complexity of a review? Like, okay, do we accept like thousands of lines, or do we want to keep small changes? Do we allow mixing of refactors and changes? My answer to this would be hopefully not, right? Because then things can be hard to decipher what is a change and what is a refactor. So generally, my suggestion would be to try make small changes if it's possible, keep refactors and changes apart, and reviewers. I think General Camo already had some ideas on that.
I think in terms of the size of the code, I think it's going to be determined by keeping focused on the feature or bug that's being fixed. You might, let's say, it's just now it's as small as possible. Don't mix different issues and bugs in the same code. I think it's a good general practice anyway.
Yeah. But also don't unnecessarily split them, such as don't fix don't go fix int bug with AI logic, and then another issue, fix int logic with AI deploy logic. Don't do that. Keep them together. That way we don't have 300 PRs on a single bug. However, yes, you should avoid fixing completely unrelated bugs. You shouldn't go ahead and say, okay, I'm going to go ahead and I am updating the game to DirectX 11, and also we are moving from SDL3 to SDL5 in the same PR. That is not going to fly.
Or even something as simple as I'm fixing this big bug and I'm fixing that bug. But it's like, well, we want that one, but not that one for various reasons. And now you're going to merge, you put them into the same one. Damn it.
I think basically the rule here is to just try to keep them atomic where reasonable. That's it.
As for review count, I guess that really comes down to the reviewer, the area of expertise, and the strategy that you want to use, whether you want to have assigned owners of particular areas of code where they perhaps only need to be the one and only person that needs to be reviewed, or perhaps you've got people that are need to prove themselves to the community, and it's like, well, if 2 or 3 of these people review the code, you go, yeah, okay, we'll take that through. I don't know what's currently established for what we're currently doing here on the Community Outpost, which the repository.
So I come from another community. I mean, I've been involved in the Generals community for years. However, I've been working with the Space Station 13 community for years, at least for the community I was involved in. And this is the standard that I also brought disease on and Arctic Dolphin. So first off, I want to establish a maintainer council. The maintainer council's job is to review a pull request that is ready for merging, that has the required pull requests, and potentially get it merged, possibly under a merge queue with workflows, depending on what we do with that. I have not looked into that yet. But the main rule there is don't merge your own PRs. With maybe a very limited exception for critical security flaw. Basically, maintainers are expected to not merge their own PRs. I would also like to go ahead and introduce a system. So one of the big problems that we've had with code reviews, you have random people just looking at the GitHub at the latest status, and then they go into a PR and they give what we call a thumbs up code review. They approve the code. They give an approving code review without actually checking if the code is sound or not. Basically, just signaling their approval. So in that case, I want to go ahead and establish a council of trusted code reviewers, people that we know are trusted to actually review the code and not just make thumbs up code review. We may be able to combine this with code owners to automatically assign certain people to code with the code owners file as source for mentions. But this is the direction that worked for them, and I think it'll work for us, especially with the huge amount of people we have. It is reasonable to have a large code review council, but the main thing is that everyone on that council needs to be trusted to actually review the code and not just give a thumbs up. We can't be doing that.
I was thinking of maybe implementing some sort of hybrid approach. So we have a council and their what's it called? Their reviews have a certain weight, and any like review outside of this council would have a different weight. So you could theoretically merge with like 4 reviews from outside the council, but then if somebody inside the council gives a review, then then you can then it can go maybe slightly faster depending.
The main thing here, the code the purpose of the council is just to make sure that reviews that are being made are good reviews. And first off, I'm not saying this should be a closed council. If we see someone that is making good code reviews, we should not be closing off code reviews for everyone. These are just the requirements to merge. And I will get to that in a moment regarding my proposal to merge. But the main thing is we just throw people in the council that we can trust. That's the main thing. There's not much gatekeeping on it. We can just say, okay, these people are trusted to not make a thumbs up review. And let's see here. Let me think on that.
I'll just add while you're
Viewers-
thinking that the trusted individual could just say, well, okay, 4 people have looked at it. They have a quick scan over and go, yep, okay. I don't need to look too closely at that. They've done a good job. We can put that through. They're willing to take ownership for that commit happening. Essentially, we need at least someone trusted is the one who is willing to say, yeah, I stake my reputation on that commit going through.
Agree. That's the main thing. It's just this is just the thing to make sure that we're getting decent code. And I'm not saying that we should be ignoring other people either, such as if someone outside that code review council comes in and says, I requested changes, what are you doing here? This will break this file here completely. And so for that reason, we should not be ignoring them. However, we also cannot have people going with thumbs up reviews, or as General Viti mentions, AI bots who make garbage PRs or garbage code reviews.
I'd just like to say I've seen this in action. The NixOS community does this, where there's I would call them a council, but like a large group in the community of approved code reviewers. I think the term is code owners in GitHub. And when they approve a PR, it is green and it is mergeable. But anyone else that reviews code, what it does is it gives you a gray check mark. And then so, like Tarnish was saying, the code owners can come along and review, how many gray reviews it has and decide if the code is mergeable and give their own approval, and then it's good to go. And there's not too much gatekeeping around it like you're proposing, and PRs tend to flow pretty quickly. So I've seen something like this implemented for the games code base. I think would work pretty well.
Yeah, in that case, I think so.
One possible thing that also may want to consider as a strategy, depending on how well this goes, is to have a regular scheduled review board. So a number of people regularly turn up to these meetings, and you go through outstanding PRs and essentially review those as a group. Does it meet the all the criteria? But that probably goes into the next thing you're probably going to bring up, General Camo, about does it meet all the various criteria as well as the coding parts of it, because we've had problems with trying to get people to actually do the reviews in our own projects, and so by formalizing this, like every week they're going to go through all the outstanding PRs that reached a particular point with a group of people. It seems to work quite effectively for us, so that might be something worth considering if you have a problem with getting owners to review their code, coming NPR, sorry.
Yeah, that's fair. Now, just to clarify, because I think this is also important, for merging requirements. So in my community, for Space Station 13, we have two separate guidelines. So there's one guideline for what we call features. This is basically things like adding a brand new feature to the engine or uh, adding new sprites or similar to that. But in this case, this would be specifically adding new features or extending an existing feature. So for those, they require, first off, 2 code reviews from trusted code reviewers, and a minimum of 72 hours from the opening to allow any maintainers or other people to submit objections before it is merged. Just in case, say, there's something really major with that feature that might break something, like, sure, this code looks fine, this works great, but then a maintainer comes and say, hey, wait a minute, this will break this file that you guys didn't think about. And so that basically 2 approving code reviews and 72 hours minimum before it gets merged. And of course, uh, for pretty much every PR, all requested changes from code reviewers must either be resolved or have a reasonable dismiss reason. And only maintainers should be dismissing other code reviews. For bugs, the process is a lot simpler. You either have a minimum of 24 hours with 1 approving code review, or you have 2 approving code reviews and the bug fix can be merged immediately. That's basically it. So, in summary, for a feature request, 2 approving reviews and a minimum of 72 hours, or for a bug fix, you either have 2 approving code reviews and merge immediately, or 1 approving code review and it can be merged within after 24 hours. And yes, this would be written somewhere. It will probably be written either in the README or the contributing.md file.
I would say we don't need to set this in stone, but we can just start setting it up in this direction, put it there, and then see how it goes. And if it works great, then we keep it. If we feel like we need some adjustment, then we just adjust the numbers and until it fits to what we do. General Carmo, you previously mentioned that the creator of the author of the pull request should never merge his own change. I think there is an exception, and that is when the reviewers have approved the pull request and they left some comments with, hey, it would be nice to improve this a little bit, but it's not a strict requirement, then it should be up to the author to decide, do I want to merge this or do I want to go ahead and make some additional changes to what the reviewers have suggested, but it's not strictly required. And so the author will either merge right away or he will make additional changes to tweak that and then proceed from there.
The main reason to implement that rule is just to avoid any accusations of favoritism, and also ensure any bias is accounted for. I mean, it is perfectly reasonable for a maintainer to just poke another maintainer and say, "Hey, can you just take a look at my code real quick?" Now, you're right; these rules are not written in stone. For instance, even though I think we had a really big security leak at one point. So yes, a maintainer went in, made the code. They did ask for a code review, but they did merge their own code, and it was well within like 2 hours, basically. The idea behind the guidelines is that they are guidelines. They are not carvings on a stone tablet that we need to follow 100% of the time or the universe will explode or something like that. These are guidelines just to make sure that we maintain the health of our code. If there are other reasons that we need to ignore them, then we should ignore them. That's the thing there. These are guidelines, not set in stone.
But General Camo, I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just pointing out that there is value in leaving the decision to merge after the approvals to him, because the author will know the best timing to go ahead with the merging, because maybe there's a scenario where the author says, oh, actually I did realize something, the reviewers have approved my change, 2 reviewers, let's say, yeah, but oh, something came to my mind. And then in this case, it would be better if the author makes the decision when to merge and not the approvers, right? I think there's value with this.
I mean,
the
Sesson
thing
is
is,
thinking about this from the perspective of somebody who can merge, right? Because, I mean, Sesson is able to do such things, but if some external person makes changes, they still cannot merge it themselves. And I think in the end, it's the responsibility of the people who are able to merge to make an adult decision on whether or not it is the right thing.
yes, and the thing is, if that is really a concern that you're worried someone else will merge your code, then the best thing to do is to mark the PR as a draft. That solves that problem, because otherwise, it will cause organizational issues. Otherwise, and we honestly can't have that.
Yeah, that's a good point by Lucas. Like, when it's a draft, no one will look at it, right?
Well, or we'll figure something out. It's just the main thing is we can't tie things up like that, because it will cause organizational problems. I think we can discuss this elsewhere.
Yeah, we can do that. Yeah, Arctic, I didn't have this in mind that, yeah, outside collaborator couldn't merge. Yeah, I wasn't thinking that far.
Yeah, honestly, this probably is something to discuss elsewhere. It's just an idea that I had that I want to go ahead and establish this kind of thing to try and keep things organized.
Okay, do we want to move ahead to the next point?
Yeah, what is the next point?
The next one is branches. I think I already touched on this before. So the current route indicates that we will have 2 main branches for the time being, with a V6 branch supporting the compatibility efforts for community patch initial goals, and then the modern branch, which is labeled here as this one, with more generous branching out into various fields and exploring things. Integration rules, I think, will be that this branch, there are any changes that are not safe for keeping compatibility are banned. And if there is a change to be made where you know in advance that it will be compatible, and it's a fix, and it's something that Community Outpost wants for their patch, then it should be developed for this code base. So it needs to be developed for C++ 98. Because if you develop it here, and then you submit it here on this one, and then you try to integrate to this one, then it might not compile, right? Because C++ 98 might not like what you did in the newer version of C++. So I think that would be the direction it would go.
Point was mentioned. It is not C++ 98 that the code base uses, but I believe an extension, Visual C++ 98, which may have its own. General V said that, and that may have its own formatting quirks that standard C++ 98 does not have.
Yeah, no matter what it is a bit different than C++ 20, let's say.
No, we do not plan to keep the VS6 branch indefinitely, as stated. I don't know when we'll decide to say we don't need this anymore. Zizom, do you know and do you have any idea when we'll decide it won't be needed anymore?
It probably depends on the rollout strategies from Community Outpost leadership. That's not our decision to make. But I think for many developers, it should be simple enough to cater to both. I think for testing, you probably want to be on the modern branch and do your things, and then when you investigate, you do the modern branch, and only when you know, okay, this needs to be done to fix, then you can try to cater it to the V6 branch, and hopefully our CI will be able to build this so that maybe you don't even need to build it locally. But yeah, we can set up guidelines and or instructions how you can build VS6 locally as well.
I'm hoping that Legionnaire has a little bit of a vision about when we can break compatibility, but I'm guessing that's also dependent on the adoption rate, right?
Note that for our main branch or modern branch, we can break compatibility right away, right? So we will branch once we have the build pipeline and everything for the foundation complete. We can branch off, make the side branch, and this one stays VS6. It doesn't upgrade. It doesn't go to x64 and anything like that. But the other can.
One thing that we don't know is how a change to modern language with modern compiler is gonna, what result that's gonna have on the game. There is an actual chance it's gonna remain compatible. No.
We can test it. Yeah.
I don't think
we've been.
I don't want to interrupt you too much, but I don't think there's inherently a compatibility problem with using any language that we want, including the better version of C++. It's just a question of how we want to structure the project overall. At least that's my understanding of this.
The problem is with the networking with mismatches. The game is so hypersensitive that it actually wouldn't surprise me if a compiler performs calculations in a slightly different way, that it will increase the amount of mismatches by, let's say, 30%. The thing is, we just don't know at this stage. And I've had a few discussions with Arctic as well, and he suggested that just for now, stick to the original everything, because then we aren't potentially introducing more mismatch problems. And for now, compatibility is key, so the community feels safe installing the patch. At least that was the discussion. But yeah, eventually it could be that when we try to use a modern compiler, that everything is just as solid, just as stable, and that will definitely make things a lot easier for us. But yeah, there is also a chance that it introduces more mismatches, and then at some point we'll have to decide, like, okay, now we're going to have to make that split to go,
Right.
away from compatibility.
I have to ask some very serious code questions to anyone who's done a full audit of this thing. Where do the mismatches come from? Because from my knowledge, this is not a common thing in other video games. So I'm assuming there's some system that's been dumped into this game that's doing this. My question is, where is it coming from?
This comes from the fact that it's a deterministic simulation. So in RTS games, they have a challenge before them that they are simulating hundreds, if not thousands, of active entities. In traditional computer games, you don't tend to have quite that number of moving parts. So they use a traditional client-server methodology where the server calculates the simulation state and then tells everyone where everyone's moved, where the bullets are, and so on and so forth. But in a deterministic simulation, to reduce network impact, we actually send the commands out. So every client runs the exact same simulation using the same commands. So they must do everything exactly the same, bit perfect, or else the simulation will, via butterfly effect, spiral out of control and everyone's playing a different match.
Oh, I see. So when we're mismatching, what we've done is we've created a situation where the same inputs don't generate the same outputs anymore. Probably because we've lost a packet somewhere, I would assume.
No, well, that can cause that in theory can cause it, but the network model tends to be quite robust in that because the clients tend to monitor what they're exchanging and know when when they're missing packets and that. What we're more likely to hit in terms of a mismatch. So a mismatch is so you've got the state of a desync, which is technically that's when the clients have diverged. And what we do is we calculate a checksum using key variables in the game state, so a CRC. Those CRCs get shared amongst the clients, and when the clients compare the CRC for their simulation against the peers, those CRCs need to come up the same. And if they don't, that's what we call a mismatch. And
so, not to interrupt you, but is it possible for us to just come up with some way to resynchronize?
There are means, there are games that do things like that. That comes down to simulation, or the details of simulation and all that. But there are strategies. For one, in bar, if someone desyncs, they leave the game, then they come back into the game and they replay all the commands as quickly as possible to try and catch up. It is theoretically possible that you might be able to roll back to an at last known state, roll forward from that, or even essentially take a copy of the sim state from another machine. All of those have their own strengths and weaknesses, and it's not trivial to implement any of them. But technically, there are strategies that you can do. Though, really, in these games, you want to just avoid the whole situation from happening at all. And anything, literally, you'd be surprised by the sort of things that can actually cause a mismatch. Just try and think of an example. For example, you could have something as simple as a different language setting on the machines. If someone had sorted a list according to strings, which obviously you wouldn't do, you wouldn't want, desyncs can happen, you wouldn't do that. But in theory, if someone did that, and someone had a German locale and someone had an English locale, the sorting of capital letters is different between those locales. So that would mean the list's different, they get processed in a different order, you get a different sim state as a result. That's
So basically anything in the state machine that gets handled differently for any reason will create this mismatch situation.
I would say there will be an abundance of reasons for mismatch. So anything that is undefined behavior will be cause for mismatch. So there will be likely math related calculations that can cause this. If it's non-deterministic, there can be also simple. There can also be simple things like client has like conditions that only run certain logic on a condition of a player, right? And then introduce a mismatch. There are actually things that can be 100% reproduced. Like there's a mismatch when you have a teammate and you have some units in a bunker and you surrender, then there's a mismatch. Possibly because one client runs something that the other clients don't because he owns these guys and the other clients don't, and then they do different things, right? So one thing I want to do once I can get to it, I want to log out all sorts of things, and then hopefully we can track down where things come from. We just need to identify the various things. Also, one thing that causes mismatches, as Tarnished Knight indicated, is any state mismatches, and that also relates to data. And data is actually one of the main reasons. So, for example, any differences in positioning of things, like bone positions in models, for example, can cause mismatch. Like where does a rocket start from, right, from the model? Things like this. And anyone who modifies their game files can cause a mismatch, obviously. But that's not something we have in our control. But there can be many reasons. We need to identify this. I think it's possible to identify anything. And I would expect, now I can't make promises, but my expectation is that it is possible to make it 100% deterministic and that we don't need any reconnect strategies if the networking is robust.
I'm not convinced.
Guys, if I remember correctly, CC Hyper mentioned about floating point precision, and this also causes mismatches. If I'm not advanced C++ programmer, but I think even if you add something like some optimization, the precision is also affected by it.
So FPU that the engine's using is a whole topic. There are white papers on this, but it is a solved problem. That one thing the project may want to look at is a library called straflop that specifically deals with deterministic FPU and SSE behavior. There isn't obviously a thing for it for ARM, but it could be ported to ARM as well.
Specifically, what are you looking for? I want to write this down.
Straflop. I'll put that into the chat there. It's a bit of a funny library name there, but it has standardized implementations for sine, cosine, and all that, because when you start getting into cross-platform, you want to make sure you're using exactly the same code for those. If someone's compiling GCC and someone's Visual Studio, they may use different implementations, and that can result in inaccuracies. But the principle is that it provides standardized functions. It also provides the functions to set these FPU states to IEEE 754, which is the international standard for floating point calculations. And it supports FPU, it supports SSE, and it provides functions to check that the FPU is in the correct state as well. Now, I understand in the very latest Intel chips that the FPU doesn't actually correctly report its state, but that's a slightly different issue here. But what we do in bar is that the engine will set explicitly the state at periodic intervals. It does have this check, but we haven't had a mismatch in the FPU state for over a decade since using straflop.
I think it's definitely something to look into. I just wrote it down, straflop. Regarding your comment on resolving all mismatches and not needing another way to reconnect, I don't agree with that. There are other reasons to disconnect besides a mismatch. And there are certain mismatches that we have no control over, such as what if someone loses power? No code in the world is going to fix that.
No, I think that's different than mismatch. That's I think disconnect.
That's a disconnect.
I would say.
Yeah, I'm aware of that. What I'm referring to is his own proposal to not have any way to restore a connection or resync a mismatch.
No, I agree. It would be a nice feature to have some sort of recovery function if somebody drops out, that they are able to rejoin. But what would happen with their objects in game while that is happening is, I think, also a question.
Yeah, we could discuss that later. I think this is a little off topic, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I was about to say we are getting off the track right now again, and we haven't answered the initial question yet.
Branches, yes.
Yeah, about the branches and when we are allowed to break compatibility.
I think we already discussed that. Break compatibility on the VS 2022 branch. VS6 branch will maintain compatibility with 1.04 binary until such a time as we decide that it's not necessary anymore when there is widespread adoption.
I
think that
unless it can be proven that the VS 2022 branch is actually 100% compatible with VS6, then it wouldn't be needed, but I think that will be hard.
But we
impossible.
But we still need 2 branches at least, because one branch is already, exploring things, and the other branch is more strict. I think that's the main difference between these two.
I think that's the way to go.
Mm-hmm.
But I certainly agree with Zenon that the concern is that we have these desyncs, and we want to obviously try and minimize them as much as possible. That's probably going to guide some of the earlier efforts on development after you get past the point where you need to maintain compatibility, because unfortunately, that's
Yeah, it's starting to get late. Yeah, it's been over 2 hours now. We need to move on.
Yeah.
I noticed Janosch was. Oh, hello, Janosch. Yes, you're in the meeting. Are you able to talk about the graphics discussion right now, or is that not something you're able to do? Because that's something I do want to bring up while you're here. Oh,
I
he can't
invited
right
him to
now.
speak, but he has to accept.
Yeah. You have to accept as a speaker. Yeah, we kind of did the stage thing to avoid leaving and joining noises. It should come up on your Discord. Should pop up, say, join the stage or something like that.
Yeah, hit the green button, not the red one.
Just for clarification, Janosch is a programmer at W3D Hub and is potentially looking into ways for rendering graphics. I'll let him discuss more on that. He would have more information on that. But it's a long-term project of us to potentially, what's the term? Potentially do some collaboration with other communities regarding this.
He has to switch to his desktop. I think he was on his phone.
Yeah. All right. We'll have to switch to another topic. What was there was a topic before the graphics API. What was it? Build system. The build system is a great one. Or target platform is also a good one too.
I think he's
Okay.
in.
Yeah. Build system's a good one. Let's go on to build system. Zizon, I think you have some words to say on this.
Well, yeah, currently our efforts are just on CMake. I don't know. I don't even know what Meson is. For me, CMake is perfectly fine. I guess Omniblade is also perfectly fine with CMake. Yeah.
CMake. I mean, we use SharpMake in W3D Hub, which is also fine. I mean, those are the two I would use, either CMake or SharpMake. And we already have a CMake version available, so probably just go with CMake. Any objections or concerns?
If we use
CMake
CMake,
is
we can.
cross-platform, right?
Yeah.
SharpMake is only Visual Studio, so I wouldn't recommend it.
Okay, CMake it is.
Yeah.
Then we are on track.
Okay, so that solved that. Because CMake is cross-platform. That's a good reason.
And it lets us use the Ninja build system so we can get fast builds out of this thing if it's big.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that ties us right to the next topic, which is target platforms and eventual cross-platform support. Windows version range, Linux, Mac, mobile, web? Question mark.
I think we can mostly eliminate mobile platforms because let's not do mobile on an RTS. That requires so many factors and decisions that is very difficult.
Let's say desktop. Yeah.
We have to
that
keep
eliminates
in mind.
consoles.
We have to keep in mind we don't own the assets. We have to. You have to have the assets, right? And I mean, Generals is only on Windows and Mac, so putting them on a mobile phone is not possible for us unless we ourselves create assets.
Yeah, you can install them on Linux with Steam, but that's about it.
People can copy the assets from a copy they already own, right? I mean, it's
yeah, they could, so they have to plug in their phone, and then I mean, yeah, okay. Let's be real though. Mobile is pretty much out of the equation here, right?
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
we should focus
we have
on
solutions for
Windows.
mobile.
I think we
Can
should
someone
focus on
greenlight,
desktop. If somebody wants to do like mobile or web as a side project, like that's up to them. But I don't think we should keep those people too much in mind.
Yeah, can someone invite Janosch to the discussion, please? Short, re-invite them. They just
I
moved to their
invited
desktop.
him like a couple of times already.
Yeah, there we go.
He's
And
already in.
now it gave me the sorry about that, technical difficulties. Hello everyone. Thank you, GenCam, for introducing me. Yeah, let's go with that. I contributed a lot to W3D rendering. I also work in the industry. I'm not going to make a big deal out of that. Not going to flex on that. If anything, I'm maybe not as experienced in CNC as most, if not all of you over here. So, but it's a pleasure and honor to be here. I have two main concerns with the source code now out. One of them is obviously rendering. The other one, which was mentioned here, the cross-platform thing. Probably not going to say anything groundbreaking here, but the best approach I would recommend to this is kind of an abstraction approach. Don't need to do anything like crazy advanced, like not have to support every conceivable platform, but something on the level of, for now, it works on Windows, but it's done in a way that it doesn't assume Windows. Like you have some API you're always interacting with, and then behind the scenes, maybe it's calling a bunch of Windows things. That's the approach I took with my homebrew engine, for example. I don't know how much the current source code is interfacing with like, well, at least the kind of stuff I've seen so far. It does kind of assume pretty much Windows. And yeah, impl abstraction. Yeah, there's a lot of ways to do it. And it kind of depends what we're abstracting. It's also worth doing just because the Windows header is ginormous. Just to name one of them.
I think an abstract approach is probably the most solid idea, and it just avoids issues, especially if we can use something like SDL to remove certain aspects. Like I know SDL can get rid of certain Win32 calls, then we should just use that. Yeah, the game logic is pretty cross-platform. It's mostly the renderer, which relies on D3D DX8, as Fighter19 said, and that's painful. Yes, it is. And also, there are certain calls specifically for the window that calls Win32. That's also annoying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of the first thing would be identifying the modules which are kind of affected by this. And I think the two main ones would be rendering and platform. But also just, cautioning that some kind of stuff just likes to leak all over the place, like D3D code showing up practically in the game code and that kind of thing, which you do not want. Sorry, where are we on the agenda?
Yeah, so that was the cross-platform discussion, and I think a big one related to this target platforms and discussion is also the target graphics backend. There's a lot of proposals for that related to modern DirectX, OpenGL, Vulkan, etc.
Can I say one thing to the platforms? Do
Yeah,
we
go ahead.
want to talk? Do we want to talk about Windows XP again, or do we just ignore that for now?
That's a very good point, actually.
Uh,
Probably another reason to do it, like do a nice separation is if somebody wants to port it all the way back to XP, they should maybe have the opportunity to do that. Yeah, Steam doesn't support it, but like maybe somebody wants it to like they have a copy of the game. Well, then again, if they have a copy of the game and a computer which can still run XP,
They probably don't need our patch, to be honest with you.
yeah, true. Okay, fair.
So I think we can safely say, let's support the versions of Windows that Windows still supports. Maybe we'll consider Windows 7 too, but I think we can dump XP pretty safely at this point.
Yeah.
And if someone wants to port it to Windows XP, they're welcome to. They just probably should not assume that this branch will always be
Yeah,
on Windows.
I'm mainly asking because I think especially Setson is interested in keeping XP support.
Oof, not particularly. I can say that from experience over the last years, every now and then I got some message about someone who tried to run the game on XP and maybe ran into some problem with the Gen tool. Because I didn't maintain XP, but technically Gen tool was able to be compatible with XP, but I silently broke it because I didn't test it carefully enough, right? And then, yeah, some user would reach out and say, hey, I want to use it on XP. Can you fix it? But this would happen once in every blue moon. So personally, I'm not so worried about Windows XP.
Yeah, it's also probably worth mentioning that the game's like lowest operating system requirement was 98. So I don't think we're going to support these old OSs really. If you have the game on disk, just play the disk version. Should still work.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, probably the most important kind of platform compatibility we do want is, hey, it would be nice if somebody is very insistent on Linux, we should make it so that it functions on Linux and they can contribute as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's certainly more value in having Linux and Mac in the bundle than Windows XP.
Mac is tricky because how the hell do you get the ability to develop on Mac?
That
gets hard.
Said, there's also another issue about the Windows discussion. Even if we take, for example, Windows 10 as our OS that we want to support the furthest back, I'm not sure if Windows 10 is even officially supported by Microsoft in 32-bit anymore. So I think we need to be a little bit looser in that. So maybe we support Windows 10 32-bit if just to clarify that we're going to support more than Microsoft is supporting.
I think it's reasonable to support what Steam supports.
Yeah, and 32-bit is also pretty not, you can still find it, but most people can run a 64-bit thing. So
I mean, true, but for some reason, like almost once a month in our tech support channel, we end up talking to somebody running Windows 7 or Windows 10 32-bit. So they are out there, even though their PC technically supports like a 64-bit OS. They chose to install a 32-bit operating system instead. I don't know why.
Well, I don't know. Yeah, the main complication there is that means the whole code base now has to introduce a bunch of considerations like, oh, you may end up being only 32-bit instead of 64-bit.
All right. So, like, is there a specific issue with supporting both 32 and 64, or like, do we have to pick one? Because if we have to pick one, 64-bit's probably going to win.
It comes up in. Oh, sorry, you go first.
I was going to say I agree. Maybe the solution is in the legacy branch, just to call it that. We stick on 32-bit, and all the new work that's going into the VS 2022 branch, maybe 64-bit should be the target there.
It's actually a good question. Like, what would be the reasons to drop Win32? I would expect only if like we have dependencies that have no 32-bit equivalent, right?
I think the main, so this is super dumbing it down. I apologize in advance. 64-bit means you're not really concerned about what developers are going to be doing on it, because most everything will work. If it has to work on 32-bit and somebody just starts writing code that anticipates 64-bit, at best it'll just be less efficient because twice as many operations. At worst, it might like actually break things in weird, unexpected ways.
And in the Spring engine, still has 32-bit support. We dropped it in Recoil, but in Spring, it sort of does 32 and 64-bit, and there are different structure. There's different memory management for each of those. So Spring has a different way of structuring the memory. Because it has to deal with the real possibility of address space exhaustion. As games get increasingly bigger, you could suddenly get an out of memory error and you've only hit 3 gigs of memory because your address space just got so segmented up, it can't find a large enough chunk of memory to allocate in that space. So rather than using all the usual patterns that it would use for 64-bit, not caring about the address space, it has to do something else. That's just extra code to maintain, and you may find things like that, but it just increases the maintenance burden for the sake of the handful of people that may play your patch on a 32-bit operating system. And I don't think I don't actually know if we ever had 32-bit and 64-bit working together without desyncs. I know when it first started, there were a lot of problems. Maybe it does now.
Just really quickly, Microsoft is going to end Windows 10 support officially on October 14th of this year. So that's the last operating system they produced that has a 32-bit install option. So maybe we should just concern ourselves with 64-bit, since that's kind of where we're at.
I
We're
would
going
say
to target Mac OS, right? Well, 32-bit is not an option there.
Yeah, I agree. So we should not. I think this discussion is moot. Going forward, we should strive to. For now, we'll have no choice but to do 32-bit because there's some assumptions in the engine. However, going forward, we should strive for 64-bit and strive especially for a 64-bit binary. I think that's the way forward. This will enable compatibility with macOS and newer Linux builds, and continue supporting Windows.
Makes sense.
I think that does anyone have any major objections to that?
Generally, I'm full on board with 64-bit as the main thing. Can we maybe pull some number from Steam regarding players using 32-bit, like what the percentage actually is?
Steam hardware library, Steam hardware and software survey. Let's see here. Where is the OS version?
There is not a single 32-bit in the list.
There is not.
Yeah.
So that kills it right there. No 32-bit. Go forth with 64.
So it's less than 0.02% on Steam then.
Wow. Okay.
But then
Sorry,
again,
one guy. We're not doing that.
That's pretty conclusive.
I mean, that's based on the Steam player base. Don't forget, people who have absolutely like potato PCs, they're probably not on Steam. They probably can't afford to buy games on Steam.
The problem is, how
That's
much
also
should
a thing.
we expect our developer base to go out of their way to support these people? That introduces problems with contribution that we need to consider. As Yanov
No,
said,
I completely agree with 64-bit. I'm just saying we might end up with questions from such players. And like Sesson mentioned, they are there and they do reach out like on a monthly basis. There's at least one.
Well,
So
what we can do for the time being, like I don't expect that we jump on 64-bit like immediately. So if we do a lot of like logic fixes and engine fixes right now, and then once we do the switch, we can create a snapshot, and that will be the last version of 32-bit. Maybe that is good enough for players, but obviously that doesn't work if we want to be players auto upgrade to newer versions, right? So yeah, we would lose the 32-bit players, but if there are 0.001% of them, then that's not a concern, right?
I think also if we just do good code maintenance, then worst case, it's all open source. So if somebody feels very strongly about 32-bit and whatever other architecture that is currently like not the mainline focus, they can just jump on, work on it, and then put in a pull request, and there we go. We've continued maintenance for it.
True.
It's just going to be like, okay, it's not the core team's focus to support those platforms, but they're not banned. Like, we're not saying, no, we're refusing to support them.
I think that's a good compromise.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to actually reject any request to support 32. We just don't want to work it on ourselves.
Agreed. I think that's the way to go.
Yeah, sounds good to me. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Now we can talk about graphics backends.
Yeah, I want to discuss the graphics backend. And I want to open the floor to Janosch about this.
I guess I'd open with a question. I was introduced to this topic in the sense that somebody mentioned SDL3. I've been re-invited to speak.
Weird.
So yeah, SDL3. I am familiar with SDL2. I use it. I know it also has rendering capabilities, but like, it's never really been the main focus. It's more like if you really need to draw something and don't want to have to hassle with a backend, you can use it, and it gives you sort of platform independent rendering. I don't know if I'd use it for an entire game, but I'm curious where that proposal came from and what's the sort of argument in favor.
So apparently SDL, according to General VD on chat, SDL3 now has a GPU module, but it's not as battle tested as SDL2.
Yeah, I'm seeing the chat. I had a quick look, and it has some feature set, but I think it's a little too limited. Now, okay, multiple things here. These games being as old as they are and the relatively simplistic rendering they do, it's not. I think SDL3 could probably handle them just fine. So in and of itself, I'm not saying it's incapable of it. It kind of depends what's the sort of like what's the kind of how high do we want to set the bar, basically? Like, how advanced do we want a modern renderer backend to be for it?
Well, for this, I think our big concern is just having it work the way that it works now. So if we can support the same feature set that we're getting out of DirectX 8 or whatever extension we're using, then it's fine.
Yeah.
But that's up to you guys. What do you think?
So
that's a bit tricky because DX8, I think that might actually have still been fixed function. So if anything, probably one of the hardest things would just be replicating the exact same behavior on a modern API. In terms of feature set, like D3D11 probably covers literally everything that is necessary. So, and it's simple enough that it kind of covers, but of course, D3D11 is just Windows, so it needs to be. I'm only using it as a reference point, as like this is the thing which is still not as mind-bogglingly complicated as like D312 and Vulkan by comparison, and but advanced enough that it's not as clunky to work with as like a fixed function pipeline. So people can program shaders, they can do all sorts of crazy stuff if they want to. and it can reasonably well support the old behavior. So, and here's where it gets complicated. The nicest thing would just be to have like a interface which is sort of agnostic to whatever the backend is and draws the game. Like it says, okay, I look at what the game state is. That means I need to draw a mesh here, a texture, or like some particles over there, converts them into draw commands, and then sends them over to the renderer backend. And if there's a good separation, then you can use whatever as your renderer backend. It could be the SDL3, thing. Again, it could be kind of the scenario like as we discussed with the platforms. As long as whoever is implementing it conforms to the layers and the required interfaces, they can implement whatever they want. Somebody could go ahead and start working on the Vulkan API or the Vulkan implementation. Somebody else could work on D3D11. Somebody could even do OpenGL. Whatever they please. The big question is whether that's both possible and worth it. Again, like what are the requirements going to be?
So I suppose that does go into long-term ideas. So this is my personal thing. I don't know if this is shared with other people, but my idea is to at least get to at least support the W3D format as that Renegade does, possibly with the newer features from Middle Earth, etc. So that would require DX9 at the minimum with the newer shader pipeline. I also would like to get newer features available for modders to implement within the engine. We don't necessarily need to use them immediately. It's just mostly there for people to fork off of this project and have those features available for their use. And I think that would be the best way forward, and I don't think that would cause too much of a performance or overhead impact. It's just long term, I would like to be as flexible as possible and see what we can do. And maybe if we get some improvements to our existing graphics with little work necessary, that'd be great. But I do also think we need to support legacy formats where reasonable.
Yep.
I think from player perspective, I think most of community are actually happy with how the game looks, right? So this is something that it does come up that some players say, "Oh, I would like to have it more modern look," and so. But generally, multiplayer community is very happy with how the game looks, but they're unhappy with many other things that are rooted in technical issues. So I think there is always a desire to preserve the original look of the game in some way.
Legionnaire said his girlfriend said the graphics are bad and stopped playing immediately.
I have the
That's
same
fair.
problem. That's
Quick-
the thing. I think there should be the option there of supporting
Girlfriends.
girlfriends. Yes, we should have a girlfriend checkbox. You know.
No, but really, I think my idea here is support better graphics for people to implement in another project. It's just something we build into the engine. We don't necessarily have to force it onto players, but we should have it there available for modders and for whatever remake attempts people might make, that sort of thing.
I have a
We should
more
look
basic concern than all of that. Not to interrupt where you're going with that too much, but are we able to compile the code base that we have on the C++ that we're trying to get to with the DirectX that we're going to be shouldered with? Or do we have to decide right now what kind of graphics API we're going to pick for this?
No, I can jump onto that. So, but before I do that, just a very quick question for people more versed in generals. A Renegade is fully like single-threaded because it's from a time when multiple CPU cores were just not a thing. Was that still true for generals?
Generals is older.
Yes.
Sorry?
Isn't generals
So it's all-
older?
So it's like pretty
No, it's not.
sure
But
they're-
Zizon's right. It is single-threaded with one exception. There is a separate DirectX thread, which is also true of Renegade, which handles some texture loading and a couple other things. So basically, there's 2 threads, and that's it.
Yeah. And even that's kind of more just like it does some async loading.
That's it, yeah.
Doesn't actually run rendering. Okay, I'm gonna say some things that may be controversial, but I'm just using them for reference. So I'm not saying anything. I'm gonna name drop Unreal, but this is just for terminology's sake. So my big brain plan with Renegade was to do essentially render proxies. So basically the game plan is something like this. Right now the game has these classes that handle renderable objects. I'm just keeping all of that, but carving out all of the actual like graphics API and any kind of direct rendering code. So it thinks it is the thing rendering, but all it really does is just send off a bunch of instructions to the render system in this new setup. The render system is still not technically a graphics backend. It is just the backend agnostic system, which you can program from the game. So it is not opinionated about like what is the specific thing drawing me. It practically doesn't even know that it's generals drawing to it right now. And it just has implementations for here's how you draw meshes, here's how you draw from the game's perspective, here's how you draw a mesh here, here's how you draw particle effects, and so on. And then this is converted into graphics API commands, which can then be sent off to the actual backend, which is mostly compatible with either the OpenGL D3D11 type backends or the more modern ones. I say mostly, it gets a little bit more complicated, but the advantage of this kind of separation, and yes, and the crucial thing here is this layer is already on a separate thread. So the game completely is decoupled from any rendering, which is even like this doesn't boost the graphics, but it does boost performance. Like your game simulation can run much faster. You're less likely to fall behind if that's even a concern.
As a note, that will improve some mismatches.
Yes. Well, I don't want to guarantee anything that crazy, but definitely it should. If for anybody that like performance is bad, and also as people are going to start making content for it, this will be like a nice boost. And yeah, there's like a 3-layer separation here. There's the game, which is completely agnostic to rendering. It just cares about making sure that the logical state of the game is correct. And then every frame it sends off updates to the view. The view is like, okay, here's all the stuff I'll need to render. And that can be pretty flexible in like per game, it might be a little different. And then finally, there's the actual backend, which only cares about the view, like what's in the view. I have a bunch of meshes here I need to draw. There's a bunch of particle effects I need to draw. And then that can be tailored depending on the backend. I keep bringing that up because D311 and 12 are very difficult to wrap in the same abstraction. They just have a lot of fundamental differences in how they behave. It's doable, but just very like headache inducing to even think about. So I'd rather, or like, I would propose that the alternative is to just set up this kind of thing where people can independently work on the game because it no longer cares about rendering. The view, which is like in between and kind of figures out how the game can be visualized. And then the graphics backend is just like, okay, here's all this visualization info. How do I turn that into stuff that the backend can understand? And of course, you immediately also get multi-threading and all the advantages of mod.
Is
Yes,
that
this
something?
proposed. I
Oh
just
yeah,
want
and
to say that
sorry, to answer the question that was mentioned just a moment ago, this also decouples you from which backend you pick. So you can pick any of them. Maybe the D3D11 is less, sophisticated, but it can get the job done. Even OpenGL has all the necessary features. It might not be as fast, but it'll work. And then it's easier to implement. So it's like the actual first functioning implementation of this that I would go for. I'd go for the easy APIs like OpenGL and D3D11. D312 is just going to be a headache and take much longer. But it should be done in a way that somebody can jump on and start working on it.
Are you proposing that this could be used for the legacy branch?
no. This probably will not be used for the legacy branch as this changes too much, and I don't even think the legacy branch will be able to support any kind of multi-threading.
To be clear, what is the legacy branch?
So the idea is the legacy branch, we were discussing it earlier. The legacy branch will be binary compatible 1.04, just until we get a rolling adoption forward. Then we can later on deprecate it. We have all the new changes on the VS22 2022 branch, which is not binary compatible. And then we can roll that out with all the new features, the new stuff, everything like that. So it's
Yeah,
kind
there's
of
no
a
way
state.
binary
So-
compatible. Forget it. Like it would just not be, because that would imply sticking to the same APIs. You really can't. I mean, you can multi-thread like older APIs. There's just like very little benefit to doing so. I mean, not.
No,
Oh, okay.
I think. Sorry, go
Let
ahead.
me take this from the other direction. In theory, what I'm describing, you could run any backend on it after the fact. Like you could. The way I would put it together is, I guess because of these, it's split into 3 layers. The backend layer can be anything that can draw onto the screen. You could even use the Windows hardware device context thing of like actually painting, blitting the screen or something.
Oh yeah,
You don't want to do that, but you can.
Yeah, that's fine. The reason I brought this up is I'm going to put my compliance hat on and say, well, then the legacy branch, if we're going to allow this, I think on certainly Windows, I think Windows 7 and beyond, what are we going, if we're using the DirectX 8.1 API, need to be clear about the library we are going to be linking to on here, and the library will be providing. Now, I know that so just point out, because DirectX 8.1 is not provided by later Windows operating systems, it does not fall within the exception clause within the GPL of being an essential component. So we will not be able to link to DirectX 8.1 DLL directly. Now, if the user does that themselves, then that's a different matter. But when we come to produce a release binary or package that we're going to offer to people, we're going to have linked this to something that provides a DirectX 8.1 API, but it's actually GPL compliant. Now, I know people have mentioned DXVK as an example, but we'll have to bear that in mind.
Yeah.
Oh, can you reach out to Omniblade, please, for this matter, because he did already.
We have already been reaching out with it. With Omniblade has already reached out with W3D regarding this stuff.
Okay.
And I should note, that's another thing to mention. We are looking into potentially implementing this in the Renegade engine as well. So it's something we may be able to share between the two engines. In my cursory look, at least with generals, it mostly uses the Westwood rendering library. And as far as I can tell, that is just slightly updated compared to the Renegade WW3D2 library. 0 Hour does some, unfortunately, it does call the graphics, it does some graphics calls directly in the engine without using the wrapper or any interfaces, so that may need to clean up a bit more, clean up the generals and Renegade. But That's the perspective of that, at least.
Yeah, the other thing to consider, Jen Cam, you mentioned the W3D format. One thing I would kind of propose the approach to take, both on we're talking about a lot about the code side, but also kind of the content side. And generally speaking, implement it in a way where we don't introduce the old assumptions. The experience with Renegade has been they have like very specific fixed constraints, like this entire render pass, because they had only fixed function. So they were like, there's 2 render passes maximum and things like that, and only 1 texture slot and all those kinds of things. The way you really want to do it is you implement a much more flexible system, which you can then, if you tune the numbers on it after that, you get like the original game's behavior. But if you then want to tune it to something else, then you're able to be a lot more flexible, because it helps a ton of other things. It helps the tooling and be a lot less convoluted. So yeah.
Sorry, I have a question regarding this. I'm not very versed in these graphics libraries. It may be a dumb question, but can we do like compute shaders and the stuff we usually do, or it's out of the it's not possible?
Yeah, it is. Anything beyond, not with the X8, yeah, as people said. Anything beyond, absolutely. It's assuming we
not
need
with
it.
the X8.
Yeah. I don't have a current like full picture in how to implement all of this. I'd have to start drawing like pictures to kind of explain the thoughts I have, but because one way to do it is you build like, okay, we don't want to be building, I think, a general purpose game engine here. We're planning to support like generals, Renegade, and offshoots of those. Which means we can focus maybe less on platform abstraction and more like view abstraction. So like a system which contains all the visualization state of the game, and then we delegate to another system which takes that information and then sends it over to a renderer backend. Other engines do this kind of the other way around. They have a view state which is then talking to a graphics like backend interface, and so the interface is being talked to rather than it looking back at the view. But that's much harder to do, because then that means that you have to have one interface with which could be put over anything. Like you have to have one interface to support both D311, D312. You start putting in if-defs to see, are you on Windows? Are you using D311? Because then you can't use this branch, and it just gets very messy. The main thing I want to avoid, which is what I kept ramming my head into, is when the code just had so many like hard-coded assumptions of, okay, it's using Vulkan or DX12 style command lists and bind lists and whatnot. Whereas what we really just want is like, okay, here's a tank. Its model has 3 textures and whatever, and then some backend can figure out what to do with that information.
We're starting to lose people because of how long this has been going on.
Yeah, sorry.
One question to the Renegade guys: are there or is there already any tooling in place for converting W3D to plain text?
No.
Okay, so that's something we don't have it. Okay, because this is something I'm very interested in, and I would like to have it sooner than later, but I didn't have time in the recent years to work on this. Yeah, so if someone like is already working on this or planning to work on this, I would be very much interested to hear. Otherwise, it's something we need to find someone to work on.
Ideally, I think I just want to support W3D as a legacy kind of thing, but we'll discuss that later. I think we're getting a little off topic on that.
Yeah, it does play a part. We do want to, like with the graphics, we want to have a way to have a more flexible, generalized like resource system, of which then a subset would be what W3D files used to do.
Yeah.
But
Did
that's
CC Hyper already reach out to you, Cecil? Because I remember in the last call he said he might have some more information to share.
No.
Okay.
We had a meeting with him. Actually, no, we didn't discuss much.
So do we have a conclusion about the graphics backend right now, or do we postpone that as well?
Honestly, I think the abstract layer that Janos proposes, I think we should explore it more. That's basically the basic thing.
But I'm guessing that would be then a shared effort between us and Renegade.
Yeah, we want to compare notes for sure. I don't want to overpromise and underdeliver because it's quite likely that the things that Generals wants is very different from what Renegade wants. One is a shooter, the other one's an RTS. Those do have fundamental differences. So it's going to be like, it might end up being more effort than it's worth to try and keep them both using the same stuff. But we
I
can
think
definitely...
I think when it comes to this community patch, I think less might be more. I just want to be the voice that says that in this meeting. There's a lot of discussion about doing some very sophisticated stuff, and I think at some point we should consider just getting a bare minimum out the door when it comes to the graphic stuff, and maybe handling a improved version at a later time.
Sure.
I mean, for sure, because I think the PS6 version, this will not even be coming into the picture.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think it's something to explore, and we'll definitely compare notes with the Renegade community. I mean, and in some cases, drawing a triangle is drawing a triangle. A light is a light. But yeah, there may be other things like instant stick support that we need to discuss independently. But we'll cross that bridge when we get there. But I think we should. It looks like the general consensus in the chat and voice at least has been we should explore an abstract layer.
Yeah.
I think we can move on to the next and last point then, I think. Which on my page is automated CI builds testing policy.
GitHub has that, if I'm not mistaken.
What's your proposal, Nils?
It wasn't my point, it was Lewis' point. I just know that Git has automated, has all these action stuff, and I have never worked with them. I've worked in projects like the Flex engine that actually use them, but I have never set them up. So I have no clue in that regard.
So regarding testing, I know from my workplace there are two kinds of programmers. One programmer is always very diligent and tests all the stuff, and the other programmers, they just implement and it looks good, but they don't test so much or at all. And so I highly encourage everyone to test their changes in the game to see if they were correctly on the code paths that you expect them to run. And I think Community Outpost has gathered a lot of helpers who are willing to help out with testing. So perhaps there could even be the case where our automated builds like generate the executable, and then you say, okay, hey, here, Community Outpost, can you please organize a testing round for this to really make sure this is good? And only when the testers say, yeah, this looks promising, then go ahead with the merge.
I would even go so far as to say maybe Community Outpost is doing like user acceptance testing. I don't know if a lot of these testers are actual testers, if that makes sense. So we'll need to see within the pool of people we have what the skills are of these testers to see if they're like end users. Yeah, exactly. If they're actually end users or if they're uh, actual testers, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's I think in most cases, at the very least, the author and code reviewers should probably test the code to make sure it works.
And regarding the GitHub workflows, I'd be more than willing to explore that once there's a clearly defined way that stuff can be built and that has settled in a bit. I know that they're working on it right now for VS6. So once that is more or less set in stone, that's I think the time that that we can start setting up CI.
Yeah, and at least get the basics going, like checking if it actually builds for the target platforms, stuff like that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think ideally we'd have one for every PR that touches code. We will have some sort of testable, executable rolling out that we can then also hand over to our army of testers or users for validation.
Even though we do have that army of testers now, I do kind of worry for the future when there's less people available. And I think especially as we migrate the code to newer standards, it would be useful to write at least some unit tests for things that you don't necessarily have to go into a game to validate. I'm thinking things like, even the random number generator in its current state, but core bits of game logic are definitely unit testable. Things like that, just to reduce the amount of PRs that actually need a full, individual QA tester going at them.
Well, okay, actually, that's an interesting thing. Maybe we shouldn't like send QA people after each PR. Maybe we should have some milestone versions, and then we can release like a beta of a release for actual like QA people to test.
Yeah, we could do like nightly patches.
Yeah.
Well, if there is a change that is deemed to be risky because it has a great complexity, then there is certainly value to test it before it goes into mainline.
Yeah, for sure.
Regarding unit testing, are there tests in the current code base? Do we know that?
I don't
think we
think
can
so.
at least do a C-lang format test, and we can probably just do a build test. But I don't think there's any other. I don't think there's any other tests that we can easily set up at this point.
Yeah, like this array says, I have seen a lot of asserts, but not like particularly any unit tests or anything like that.
Yeah.
All right.
Bad thing is there's not a lot of unit tests to run on a game. Well, a lot on like the libraries and whatnot, but the game itself, it's a bit tricky. What you might want is something like a smoke test, like if you can run like 100 units ramming into each other and have some kind of expected behavior. Just
Yeah,
not
that works.
quite the same as yeah.
The shell map is a little bit of that.
Yeah, but I don't think we can run that in the GitLab runner.
No, well, I don't think we can. So I think we need to I think we need to just put guidelines. Hey, can you test this for me? Can you just build 100 Humvees and 100 missile defenders and throw them at each other?
It might be more complicated than I can think of feasible ways to do it, like it does some kind of check on the output and sees that, oh, it's actually very different from what was expected. But yeah.
Yeah, Richard brings up a really good point. We can just load a replay or load a mission map that we can give to a testing person.
Oh,
That
actually,
way
yes.
it's actually reproducible.
Yes. Determinism check, absolutely, 100%. Like give it the same input twice.
Yeah, determinism. Forgot all about that. Definitely.
You
But I think
110%
other than
want
these
that.
points, I think it's something that we should say, let's explore this and return to this at a later meeting. It's just, let's explore some tests we could maybe do, and then we'll come back and say, okay, here's my ideas. But for now, I don't think there's much we can discuss because we don't even have a CMake build right now.
Well, it's almost done.
Yeah.
Almost.
Okay. Is there are there any other points?
Well, my meeting log is full. I don't know if Setson has anything else.
No, what other points would we have had here? Let me see.
Future source code asking if generals and generals MD will stay separate from Druminator. My perspective on that, there are some changes between 0 Hour and generals that I would like to investigate, most certainly. I don't want to delete it right now, but I consider generals kind of a low priority to maintain. But I think it might be at least a good test bed to build off the graphics API from that, because this generals, for the most part, is pretty clean with its rendering calls. 0 Hour, unfortunately, adds a little bit of a mess there that may need some additional handling, and that may not be quite so conducive to the graphics API immediately.
So here's one more good point by Luis on the list. He's raising that what is the policy regarding refactoring old code? Do we allow contributions that modernize the old codes? Yeah, what's a risk affinity we have for this?
We can set up tests to make sure that the behavior doesn't change.
In my view, if by old code he means stuff on the VS6 branch, I'd say no major refactors. Just leave all of that for the new branch, right? Because ideally this VS6 branch will be deprecated in 9 to 12 months anyways.
Yes, I agree with this. The VS6 branch doesn't need any refactorings. It only needs definite bug fixes that we would like to have. Yeah.
Agreed.
For the new modern branch, I think like large scale refactorings, there will be these things like anything like any old C functions that do like unsafe string concatenations or things like this. Like this is always something that you can mass refactor, so to say. But yeah, I think everyone is encouraged to be diligent and like look more than twice, because sometimes like you think, oh, I can change this easily, but then maybe it's more complicated. Maybe, yeah. Or like the other cases with how we deal with memory management, right? So there's probably a lot of new deletes all over the place, which is hard to track and hard to follow. Ref counting hard to follow, and yeah, these things, but they need to be touched very carefully.
Okay, I think that was the conclusion.
Yep, I think so. Don't refactor on PS6.
No. All right. Was that it?
Yeah, I think it was a good meeting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it has been a long meeting, 3 hours, and also I have notes that are about 4 pages long, and I know I missed some stuff because we went on to a lot of tangents.
Yeah, I would like to know again where I could post the meeting log I've written down. Should I put it on GitHub? Should I post it here on Discord somewhere?
Post it on Discord
let's
for now. We'll figure it out later. That's really it.
let's do this. Send it to me in DM, and then I'll send it in announcements and pin it there.
All right. We do that. Do you want the MD file or just the plain text?
Either is fine. I'll deal with it.
All right.
And post it on GitHub as well. You can go ahead and do that in a discussion somewhere.
Yeah, all right.
All right.
All right, I will then drop out. Thank you all for participating. I think it was a great meeting. Wish you all a good time. Bye-bye.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.
Yeah. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Thanks, everyone. Good night.